All right, we might get started. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are switched off or turned to silent. Thank you very much. My name is Councillor Wes Galt and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Nick Stavro, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Mayor, Councillor Di Gillies. At the other side of the horseshoe table, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis and Councillor Susan Bigger. I acknowledge our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr Brian Wee, to my left, and Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker, on my right. There are other officers present and they shall be introduced as they commence their presentations. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee is being live streamed on Council's YouTube channel to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council's YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting the evening, when we come to the agenda item you're interested in, it will be introduced first by an officer, then I will call upon you one by one, if you've registered to speak, to come forward to address us. If you are making submission, please present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused and relevant on issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to a planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and potentially suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. There will be a strict 3-minute limit for every speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair, I can vary that time, I seldom do. At the 2.5-minute mark, we shall ring a bell, indicating you have 30 seconds left to wrap up your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to exercise due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee in general, and refrain from inappropriate behaviour. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. You may only address the committee with the consent of the chair and must take direction of the chairperson whenever called to do so. Where members of the committee disrupt or fail to comply with this direction, the chairperson can have them removed from the chamber. And just to finish, I would like to encourage all submitters, officers and councillors to speak directly into the microphone. This will ensure that everyone can hear what is going on in the proceedings. We will now move to apologies. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Franco has an apology this evening.
Thank you. I'll now move to the previous minutes and adoption thereof. We're looking at the minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of December of this committee, the 2nd of September of this committee. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm those minutes? Councillor Park.
Yes, Chair, and I'd just like to make a brief comment about them. I'm not seeking to amend, but on page 12 of the minutes under item 4.2, we've strayed from what had been the long-standing convention that there'd be a very brief summary of the issue raised, and that would be prepared by officers. And apparently, in respect of 4.2, that rather long-winded account arises by virtue of Councillor Franco having passed a document to officers. And I'd just like to sort of, seek to reaffirm that we'll go back to our long adopted practice that officers will make a very brief summary themselves rather than councillors individually having input, because otherwise we'd all be looking to incorporate our words of wisdom into the minutes right throughout. And so I hadn't noticed it until I saw this one tonight, but it's a significant departure from what we've done in previous years.
Councillor,
happy to move.
Yeah, happy to move on that basis. We'll make a note of that. Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Stavro.
I second it.
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thank you.
Is anyone opposed? I will now put the motion. Those in favour? It is unanimous. Thanks very much. It's carried. We now move to declarations of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillors or council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you wish to foreshadow for matters in the agenda tonight? There appear to be none. Thank you. Councillor Stavro, your light's still on. Are you clear? Thank you. We can now move into the body of the meeting. We'll move directly to item 3.1. The Residential Development Assessment Policy, or RES Code, proposed changes. This is to do with a submission to the Department of Transport and Planning. So we'll start with a presentation by officers tonight, led by Scott Walker and Jack Farrow. If you could start, Mr. Walker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to introduce this item and set a little bit of context before handing over to Mr. Farrow to go through a little bit more detail of the changes that are proposed here. And the changes that have been put forward or proposed by the state government relate to changes to residential development, or how residential development for single dwellings, multi-dwellings, townhouses, apartments up to 4 stories will be assessed under the planning scheme. In fact, under all planning schemes throughout Victoria. And these changes are one of many changes that have either occurred or are proposed following the housing statement by the state government in September last year. So this is one of many of those changes that have been put forward or proposed. And it's interesting in Burundara Council being in the position to be able to make comment or provide comment on these proposed changes, because Burundara is one of a select number of councils, or in fact officers of Burundara Council are one of a select number of stakeholders that have the ability or have been consulted on these changes. There is not broad community consultation being undertaken, and that's certainly something that is of significant concern, and of significant concern in a submission that we have put forward and had to put forward in a very short period of time on behalf of Council, and we're seeking your support to endorse the submission that we have already put forward. And I say that in the context, again, of the changes being a significant shift in the way that our planning system works in Victoria. Because these changes that are proposed change the appeal rights for residents to take or contest matters at the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal if they meet, or proposals meet, the deemed to comply provisions. And the deemed to comply in itself is also a significant shift in that while there is public notice, if a proposal is deemed to comply with standards, then it must be approved by a council. So those two changes in combination are quite a fundamental and significant shift in the way that residential development applications, which are the majority of applications that we deal with in places such as Burundara, are dealt with. And so these are fundamental concerns with the changes that are put forward that we have outlined in the report here this evening. I will now hand over to Mr. Farrow, who will tell us a little bit about how this has come about and the specific changes and our particular concerns with individual standards.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, and through you, Chair. Council officers received notice of the proposed amendment on 27 August 2024 and were given 11 working days to provide a response. To ensure these timeframes could be met, a response was provided at officer level prior to the deadline. The officer response is outlined at sections 4 and 5 of attachment 1, which is the report, together with Appendix A. The proposed planning scheme amendment relates to applications for dwellings in residential zones, including apartment buildings and including up to 4 stories. The amendment seeks to change the operation of Res Code, making all standards deemed to comply, introduce a deemed to comply approach to neighbourhood character, add, vary and delete certain standards, and remove third-party appeal rights where deemed to comply standards are met. In terms of development outcomes, a few key parameters are highlighted. Developments would not require front setbacks exceeding 6 metres, that's reduced from 9. Maximum building heights would be deemed to comply, so there would be no ability to seek contextual or transitional height responses. Site cover would increase to 70% and 80% in the general residential and residential growth zones, respectively. Side and rear setbacks could be reduced at upper levels. Shadows would no longer be based on secluded private space areas. Rather, unshadowed areas to the front or side setbacks would be sufficient to achieve compliance. Screening heights for privacy would be reduced from 1.7 metres to 1.5 metres, and if views are more than 6 metres away, no screening would be required. The key points raised in the officer submission include the inadequacy of the deemed to comply approach, particularly where qualitative assessments are required. Concerns with a tick box approach to neighbourhood character. Concerns with the low bar set by the standards. Opposition to the removal of third-party appeal rights. And the inadequacy of the consultation process and a request for the DTP to carry out formal public consultation. The officer recommendation to the committee is to resolve to write to DTP and the Minister for Planning, raising concerns outlined in the officer submission, and to authorise the Director, Urban Living, to respond to any amended proposals from DTP with respect to deemed to comply. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to public submissions. We have 2 or 3 people wishing to speak tonight, but before calling you forward, I might just remind you that tonight is not to do with the planning changes to the major activity centres. It is specifically to do with Res Code, and particularly the letter proposed by officers for submission to state government. So if you contain your comments within that, that would be appreciated. So I might move first to Yvonne Bauer, if you'd like to come forward and join us at the table. Thank you very much. If you could start with your name and the suburb in which you live, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Yvonne Bowyer. I live in Surrey Hills, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Surrey Hills and Mont Albert Progress Association. We recently lodged a submission to the state government's plan for Victoria. Whilst we are still considering making further submissions, we would like to make the following points tonight regarding the state government's proposed changes to Res Code. Firstly, we would like to thank Boroondara Council. Informing residents about these changes and the changes to Camberwell Junction and the catchment area has come at some expense to Council. There has been a public meeting just yesterday. There's been letterbox drops to all residents and sponsored social media posts. We acknowledge that it has also caused inconvenience for Council officers with a public meeting held on a Sunday. Secondly, we are concerned by the lack of consultation by the state government, noting that officers were only notified by the Department of Transport and Planning of the proposed changes to Res Code on the 27th of August, inviting submissions by the 11th of September. We also note the department did not support the request for an extension and advised they were not consulting with council and were seeking comments from selected officers of council and certain industry stakeholders. We share officers' concerns that it is unclear whether officers of all councils received a notice. We are aware that Whitehorse Council, at their meeting, the council meeting on the 9th of September, councillors mentioned only being advised on the 6th of September of the proposed changes to Res Code and given until 11th of September, that is 3 business days, to make a submission. We would like to know exactly how many councils have been notified and given the opportunity to provide feedback. We are concerned that those councils who were notified were given such little notice to make properly considered responses. This was only exacerbated by occurring right before councils entering caretaker mode. We also share officers' concerns that it is also understood that there is no intention to undertake broad community consultation. Given these proposed changes may affect residents across the state, it is appropriate that all councils are informed and given enough time to provide a response. Furthermore, the public should be consulted and given the opportunity to provide feedback, not just selected industry stakeholders. Lastly, we look forward to hearing more about this matter and working with council where appropriate. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thanks, Ms. Bowers. Spot on time-wise. We do have questions from officers. Councillor Addis.
Thanks. With your indulgence, I'd just like to thank Ms. Bowyer for acknowledging the work our officers put into making their time available at short notice. And I recognise that's not a question.
Thank you very much. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. You can return to the gallery. Thank you. I call upon Julie Mulhauser to join us at the table. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Julie Mulhauser and I'm a resident of Canterbury. I'm here tonight to support the officers' report to the state government and also to commend Boroondara Council for the work that they have done on what are quite far-reaching changes when they're considered all together. I've been involved as a community representative on the community representative group for the Camberwell Activity Centre and have very serious concerns with the process that is being applied to what are very far-reaching changes in and of themselves, but in concert they add up to quite profound changes in how communities are consulted, how local governments are consulted, and the existing rights that communities have and the standards that we expect. And as a result of this lack of confidence with the process, I also have a lack of confidence with the outcomes. I think I don't have confidence in the quality of the outcomes, nor that they will solve the very, very real problems of a long waiting list for public housing and unaffordable homes and rents. So I commend Boroondara Council for devoting quite considerable resources to a very timely response to all of these changes, to sending letters explaining these significant changes to residents and organising a community forum at short notice prior to entering the caretaker period. That would be my last point, is that it will be quite difficult for communities to have their voices heard in what will be a really critical period of time until these changes are finalised at the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions of this speaker? There isn't. Oh, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Mulhauser, for your presentation. when you mentioned that you were a member of the committee working with regard to the Camberwell Junction Structure Plan, I know that is separate to what we're discussing tonight, but I think you used the terminology in concert with. Was that committee aware of any of these proposed res code changes during that conversation?
Not at all. So just to clarify, I was on the community reference group for the Campbell Activity Centre under the auspices of the DTP, but I also participated in the workshops Boroondara Council ran for the Structure and Place Plan. Yep, so they're two separate things. No, there was no discussion of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation tonight. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. The next speaker I had listed here was Elizabeth Van Kruinen. Do you wish to join us and speak?
Hi everyone, thanks for the opportunity. I am Elizabeth Van Kruinen. I reside in Camberwell and all my concerns have been covered, so I won't sit here and just repeat them, but the council has my support and it's terrific in the short time frame of all the energies that have been submitted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We will now return to officers for matters arising.
Thanks, Chair. There's no matters arising from the speakers in regard to the detail of res code changes, so we won't need to go into those in any further detail at this point. However, I just want to acknowledge the linkage between these res code changes and the growth area identified around the Camberwell Activity Centre and acknowledge some of the comments made by speakers in regard to the implications there. Whilst the Camberwell Activity Centre plan is not proposing to change the notification and appeal rights within that 800-metre residential growth area around the activity centre, the implications of the res code changes, if they are implemented, will in effect make changes within that growth area to the way that the planning applications for residential development up to 4 stories are considered, that if it is deemed to comply, you must approve, council, and there is also no appeal rights for objectors if it's a deemed to comply proposal. So whilst the activity centre in itself is not making that change, the implication of the overlaying of the 2 changes with the res code change will have an effect in that area.
That's it. Thanks very much. We do have some questions from councillors. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and also want to foreshadow a motion at the appropriate time. I'm well aware the questions I might ask, that I'm going to ask, might not have answers, but I'll ask them anyway. The changes to res code, what will be the relationship between them and their impact on overlays? Thinking of design and development overlays as well as heritage overlays. Do you have an answer to that question?
Thanks to yourself, Chair. Happy to answer that. The res code changes will not change the overlays in themselves. So the overlays and the permit triggers that are initiated through those overlays won't change as a result of the res code changes. What will change, however, is potentially the way that developments are assessed within those overlay areas, in that the res code assessment that would bring into consideration all of the res code elements may be deemed to comply, which means that the assessment of the overlay will be narrowed, will be quite narrow around the overlay component only.
Follow-up question again about overlays. So thinking about a heritage overlay being a precinct, not an individual home, and you have, within a precinct, you will always have non-contributory buildings. So if somebody wants to do something with a non-contributory building, would the would the overlay, the precinct overlay, have any impact on this res code deemed to comply standards?
In a direct sense, no. The heritage considerations that are brought to the assessment now won't change. So the way that we view an assessment of the development from a heritage point of view will not change as a result of these res code changes. There potentially is a change in the Camberwell growth area, but we don't know exactly how that growth area consideration will be weighed against the heritage, but that's a separate matter and a separate consideration. That's not a result of these res code changes.
Yeah, just one more follow-up on that. So I guess what's behind my question is my concern about neighbourhood characters being put aside, but that essentially is what is behind a heritage precinct. So will a heritage precinct be able to protect that? Is it a sort of a quasi neighbourhood statement, character statement that can be upheld when someone is considering the redevelopment of a site containing a non-contributory building?
Again, through yourself, Chair, I don't believe that it would change. The heritage considerations on a non-contributory site in a heritage area will have regard to the broader outcomes and expectations for that heritage area, and that in itself should still stand strong, and irrespective of the change to res code that relates to neighbourhood character. Heritage sitting at a higher order. Now that's our understanding of the way this will work. I mean, obviously we need to see how it works when the final version of the res code changes are implemented and these matters are tested at VCAT, but that's our understanding at this stage.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Sinfield.
My question has somewhat been asked and I was going to foreshadow, so I'll...
Thank you very much. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. If I may actually direct my question to the CEO, with your indulgence. I'm mindful that our first presenter this evening, Ms Brouwer, referred to councillors or council going into caretaker period and the time constraints that officers have to prepare response. But I'm also mindful that this was an issue that was raised quite a lot yesterday at the forum, and I think for the benefit of our community, I'd just like Mr Storer to provide a little bit of information on the consequence of caretaker period.
Through Mr Chair, the issue Council has been dealing with, as mentioned by Mr Walker, is that we received relatively late and certainly unforeshadowed notice in relation to these changes. And councillors were very concerned that our community was not actually being informed about them and felt it necessary to at least do something to try to address that deficiency. The result of which was the forum held yesterday. One of the questions raised was why it is that the forum could not have been held at a later time, when perhaps more notice might have been available to our community. And certainly as officers, we could have used more time to do a much better preparation. We did the best we could within the time available. The reason it had to take place yesterday is because tomorrow the election period commences. Council is not allowed during the election period to engage with the community in a manner which might impact the outcome of the election. And clearly this is a matter which is, as was demonstrated yesterday, of very significant concern to our community, and one find it difficult to argue that it might not influence the outcome of an election. So we had no choice really but to hold it before tomorrow, once the election period commences. And those rules are not ours, they are put in place by the state, and we have an obligation to comply with them, which we have done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth, anything else?
one follow-up question to the officers. There was a comment made that the setback from 9 metre will be now 6 metre, and that the footprint of the development could be as much as up to 80%. I just wanted to check, is that correct?
Through you, Chair, that is correct. The 80% figure for site coverage is specific to the residential growth zone. General residential zone would be 70%. Neighbourhood residential zone would stay at 60%.
Thank you. So can I take from that then the consideration to tree planting, and in particular canopy tree planting, is now no longer a requirement?
They are still requirements for apartment buildings. For dwelling applications, there's no requirement to provide replacement planting. There's a requirement to retain some level of trees on site, which is the greater of either 12 square metres in terms of canopy cover or 10% of the site. So that would need to be fit in around that site coverage.
Right, so potentially quite a significant risk of loss of vegetation. And sorry, just one final question. So with the up to 80% coverage, that would not include driveway, is that correct? Or would that be included in the 80%?
The driveway would be treated as part of the outside of the footprint, part of the 20% of open space required.
So in theory, we could be limited to a very, very minimal space for vegetation, if any space at all. Thank you. Thank
Correct.
you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Mr Walker. With the deemed to comply, what my concern is that in most industries, regulation tends to be principle-based in recognition that one size does not fit all, and you cannot fully prescribe by rules everything and every contingency. With the deemed to comply, doesn't that go away from a principle that more modern approaches to regulation are really followed up, because they understand that the unintended consequences that can be caused by very prescriptive regulation can be so deleterious to really make the regulation more of a problem. Could you comment on that, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, more than happy to comment on that. I've been around in planning and local government planning for a long time, and I've seen the pendulum swing a couple of times, and certainly the approach that was around in the late 80s, early 90s was an approach to residential development that wasn't deemed to comply. In effect, it was a tick the box, and it was recognised in the planning industry that that approach would lead to some poor planning outcomes and some poor development outcomes. And on that basis, the planning system was changed over time to introduce much more of a performance-based approach to assessment of planning applications to improve the quality of the outcomes. This shift to a deemed to comply approach is going to significantly move back, the pendulum swinging back to that deemed to comply approach, and we have significant concern that it will lead to poorer quality outcomes on the ground.
May I then follow with another one, with your indulgence, Chair? It's probably my impression, and you can correct me that I'm wrong, but a lot of the changes through these, to the planning recently have been coming in dribs and drabs without a holistic picture being received. The interplay between what you've just commented on then and us getting regulations being dropped on a regular basis potentially has got even bigger risks. Am I misunderstanding that, or is it my feeling that regulation is not coming in with a holistic picture in mind?
Again, through yourself, Chair, they absolutely have been brought forward on a piecemeal basis over a period of time. In fact, it's been happening for around 4 years now. 4 or 5 years, there have been a series of changes. They have increased in their frequency of changes and perhaps some of the deeper cuts or shifting of the way the planning system works in some of the more recent proposals that have been put forward. So that's being done in a situation where the government is indicating it's related to housing delivery as in response to the housing statement that was put out in September last year. So that's the banner that these changes are being put forward under. It is not always evidenced that the changes will result in an increase in housing supply or affordability to address the concerns. So the evidence is not always there that provides the demonstration that that change will be effective.
May I just ask another question? With your answer, another question sprung to mind that if we're at council here every week and we're starting to feel a little bit, well, I'm starting to feel a little bit confused, isn't there a risk when you're legislating under this method to create more confusion, therefore probably a counterproductive approach to rulemaking? Am I wrong in that?
Through yourself, Chair, potentially, and I think it was evident at the forum yesterday and perhaps through some of my comments earlier about the impact of the overlay of the changes in the growth area around Camberwell with the res code changes, that those two things in combination lead to particular outcomes that in isolation wouldn't necessarily lead to. So yes, there is an element of what are the consequences and do we fully understand the consequences of all of those changes being undertaken in different ways in the planning system at the one time. So that absolutely is a concern.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. My question relates to trees and canopy cover, and I heard you confirm that 10% is the requirement. I think that's right. I was also of the understanding that state government had I don't quite know what it is, a policy that canopy cover would be 30% in general. And do we have any information about how those two things sit together?
Again, through yourself, Chair, that hasn't been fully explained. The canopy coverage objective sits at a higher level in terms of overall outcomes for canopy cover across Melbourne. Sits at a higher level in terms of policy at the state government level. It doesn't, or there hasn't been an explanation of how what is proposed under the res code changes will relate to that overall objective. And presumably the implication is that other sites or sites that are not residential development sites under res code or council land or public land in some way is going to be able to deliver the canopy cover that we would like to see throughout Melbourne to address issues such as the heat island effect.
I presume officers don't have any sense that that will be achievable on other sites, given what we know our canopy cover is and how hard it is to
through
increase
yourself, Chair, I think given some of the discussions and the information put forward when the council adopted the tree canopy strategy in recent weeks helps demonstrate the difficulty in achieving that in urban areas.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks through you, Chair, to officers. Just to clarify, which zones does this apply to in Boroondara?
Through you, Chair, it's to all residential zones.
So NRZ, GRZ, and what percentage of Boroondara is covered by those residential zones?
Through you, Chair, without having the exact figures in front of us, it's roughly 80%, perhaps a little bit more.
So would it be fair to assume out of our 165,000 residents, the majority of those residents are impacted by these reforms. I'm surprised we've only had 2 presenters speaking on this matter tonight, quite frankly. That's terrible. And I thank those residents for speaking. NRZ, I understand, has the ability to do 9 stories. Is that the case?
9 metres, 2 stories.
9 metres, 2 stories, and with no transition to a heritage property adjacent to that, that element's being removed?
Correct.
And if it was a heritage property adjacent to a GRZ, which is 3 stories and 11 metres, does that same thing apply?
Yeah, there's no ability to require transitional building heights if it's deemed to comply.
So therefore, there is no, that neighbourhood character that we've always fought for our residents and what Leafy Burundara expects, and that's gone under these provisions.
It's effectively gone. DTP have sought to replace neighbourhood character in a sense through a series of checkboxes, effectively. Certain 2 types of materials for a wall, variation in colour if you get over a certain wall width, some different planes to that wall. If these certain items are ticked off, then in the drafting of the provisions, that would be deemed to meet neighbourhood character. If they didn't meet every single provision and it wasn't deemed to comply for that particular standard, then we could fall back on the neighbourhood character policy, but we'd be completely in the hands of the developer. They would decide whether they were to comply or not and whether they are then beholden to the neighbourhood character policy.
So just to that extent, that's a good point you raise. If they don't fully deem to comply, we can apply the neighbourhood character policy. What is the mechanism beyond that for both residents and also the developer with regards to appealing a right to object?
So if a development didn't meet a certain deemed to comply standard, and for argument's sake, let's say councillors were supportive, or council was supportive, we issue a notice of decision to the objector. They can then appeal that decision, but in terms of what can actually be considered by the tribunal, it would only be that discrete standard that hasn't been complied with, which is under review.
And the developer obviously has, so both the resident and the developer have the third-party appeal rights only in that instance of a single clause not deemed to comply.
Well, the developer, for the resident, yes. The developer retains their appeal rights irrespective.
Regardless.
Yeah.
So, in essence, this is a policy to remove all third-party appeal rights for the majority of residents in Burundara, where an overlay doesn't protect them.
It could be viewed that way.
Is that a fair assumption?
I think it's fair.
That's confusing now.
Councillor Gillies, sorry.
I was just going to add, and perhaps just to add to that, more particularly, and I think the key point as well, is that where the appeal right is maintained, because there might be a component that's not deemed to comply, the appeal right only relates to that narrow component, where at the moment it would relate to the entire development.
May I ask a question on that? Because just with indulgence.
Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, I've got one further question. Obviously, this becomes a planning provision that the minister will change, I'm assuming across the state planning system?
Yes, it is. It will be a change within the planning scheme.
Do officers, I can see up to planning provision change 262. How many planning provision changes have been introduced in the last half dozen years that affect the amenity Burundara, approximately?
Difficult to say. There's been dozens of them over the last 4 or 5 years that have changed essentially the planning scheme and the way that the planning system works for different types of developments, but to varying degrees. Those changes have varying degrees of impact. This is probably one of the most significant changes that is proposed that will have an impact on a wide range of development applications. It's perhaps worth me just adding to a question that was asked earlier as well about the changes to the planning system and the way they've layered, and is this a strategic approach and a considered approach, and one where there's an understanding of the end game. And the interesting part of all these changes is that they do significantly change the way the planning system works. And as part of the housing statement, there was an announcement made that there will be a comprehensive rewriting of the Planning and Environment Act. But what appears to be occurring is that all of these changes are being made, and the Planning and Environment Act will be the last change to be made, which seems quite back to front. If you're going to fundamentally change the way that a planning system works, you would start with the change to the Act and then deal with the subsequent subordinate regulations and requirements that then support the way that you envisaged or plan the way that the new planning system will work.
Councillor Stavro, I'll go to Councillor Gillies. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On that incredibly sobering note, thank you, Mr. Walker. My main questions were regarding heritage overlays and site percentage coverage and tree canopy, and I think they have both been addressed, which just leaves me to offer to potentially second the motion that's been flagged when we see what that motion is. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hollingsworth. You were next, I think.
Thank you, Chair. With your indulgence, if I may have a second question. I'm curious of whether or not this motion, if supported by my councillor colleagues, is potentially further strengthened. If we could actually include the Honourable Lily D'Ambrose as well as the Minister for Climate Action, Minister for Energy and Resources, because I feel that this needs to go further.
Should we deal with that in debate on the matter?
Or when the motion's put, I just didn't know if I'd have the opportunity to speak at that time.
You will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stavro.
Thanks, Councillor Gold. Look, I think the comments made by by Mr. Walker answered my question well and truly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavro. It seems to exhausted the questions of officers. I'm now in search of a motion, and I'll start at the head of the queue for those who volunteered. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. I'd like to move the officers' recommendations, but would also have a few amendments of my own to add to that motion. Is this the right time to do that, or do I need to seek a seconder first? I believe I can amend it at the moment.
I think you need to amend it so someone knows what they're seconding.
Yeah, so my changes would relate to item 2, and I agree with our Mayor, Councillor Hollingsworth, when she said we need to expand the number of people that we write to. I would seek to add all relevant local members. Of the lower house would be the member for Hawthorn, the member for Kew. I think we cover some of Ashwood, plus the upper house, plus the Minister for Environment that Councillor Hollingsworth mentioned.
You could put a catch-all and come up with the list after the meeting.
Could do, yes. Right to all relevant elected representatives would catch all of it, plus Department of Transport and Planning, Minister for Planning, Minister for the Environment. Yep, I think that just about covers it.
Mayor, would you like to just state that they are state ministers?
I was going to make a clarification whether it indeed state, because if you're talking about environment, this is definitely then, it affects us in a federal, way as well, because anything we do here that goes counter to any of the climate initiatives there, they need to be informed as well. If you could.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that we need to contain it to a state matter and not federal. Certainly, our federal members should be informed, but I don't think they need to be captured in this motion, but if others disagree, I'm happy to move on that item.
Councillor Watson, the officers have had a crack at what they think you mean by that. It's now on the screen. Are you happy with item 2 as it stands now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm now in search of a seconder for the motion as it's currently amended. Councillor Sinfield.
Happy to second that.
Thank you.
Should I withdraw my previous offer then? Where do we go with it?
I'm going in accordance with a row of lights. Thank you. We now have a mover and a seconder. Is anyone opposed to the motion as it currently stands? There is no one. Councillor Watson, would you like to speak to your motion? Thanks very much.
Yes, I do, and I want to acknowledge the outstanding work done by our officers on this matter, and that including our CEO in being able to very swiftly bring the matter to the attention of our community. I want to add a few brief remarks, and what's being presented today, and there'll be a few planners in the room with perhaps a bit of a smile on their face when I mention stat planning and the Wade House case back in the 70s. And that was one of the cases we studied, and it specifically looked at the impact that one dwelling could have on another, amongst a range of other things. And planning's a balancing act between rights and responsibilities, and the proposed changes to REDS code with this deemed to comply make planning very prescriptive, and you'll see things on height limits and car parks and setbacks. That's nothing new, but this goes into territory it's never gone before. And the balancing act between the rights and the responsibilities, I think, is very adequately served by the appeal system that we have, which enables people to talk about the impact that change to a neighbouring property will have. But this deemed to comply undermines a fundamental mechanism of essentially a democratic system that has worked quite well in the past, and changing it, I think, the government needs to reflect on what problem they're trying to solve, and is this the mechanism to do it? I don't think it is. People love where they live. They love their houses, they love their neighbourhoods, and to remove the right of someone to be able to talk about the impacts that something next door is having, and they can't talk about privacy. They can't talk about the right to sunshine in the backyard. I think that the government has absolutely got it wrong, and I'm delighted to support this motion here tonight, to be able to send that message to the state government to say, I think you need to reconsider and absolutely defend people's rights to have their say through the third-party appeals provisions that we have in place at the moment. So I encourage my fellow councillors to support this motion, and again commend the officers for the very, very swift response they've been able to pull together and being able to bring our community along and for this journey that we're on right now. So I'll leave my remarks there and commend the motion to fellow councils.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I'm going to take the unusual step of handing back to Mr. Wee. He thinks we may need some minor corrections of that item, clause 2.
Sorry, just councillors to clarify. Lily D'Ambrosio is the Minister for Climate Change, and Steve Dimopoulos is the Minister for Environment. So I just noticed that I mentioned to the chair that Councillor Hollingsworth mentioned Lily D'Ambrosio, but we've got the Minister for Environment there.
Thank you, Mr. Wee, and I think it would be ideal to include both, but thank you.
Yes, and just for clarification, I'm happy with the motion as presented on the screen.
Agreed? Thanks very much. We'll now... No, they're happy with it as it stands on the screen. Thank you. But thanks for that input. I'll now move to put the motion.
With your indulgence, Chair,
Oh, Councillor Thompson.
there may be a couple of councillors that wish to speak to this.
Okay, I'll let that happen. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks for that, Chair. Councillor Watson's been very polite in moving this motion. I think this actually signals a fail of state policy, and it's manifesting itself in the planning scheme. Our residents and officers have, on the back of a bit of paper have calculated that the majority of our residents are affected by this. It is something that is quite significant in its application, and once it's actually in legislation, it changes the course for Boroondara completely, and there's no returning from it. Once it's in, it won't come back. The state governments ought to probably remove the planning scheme, as Mr. Walker said, and actually write it the correct way, but it's a failure of the housing policy first and foremost.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. For brief comments, Councillor Gillies, you mentioned you'd like to make a brief comment if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Chair. I won't reiterate the very valid points that have been made, really just to reinforce the fact that Boroondara can accommodate reasonable growth in the right balance with good design and at a pace with which amenities could keep up with it, but that will not be achieved through these changes. And again, I add my thanks to the officers for their excellent work in this way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. I'm planning to move forward and put the motion. All of those in favour? It's unanimous, it's carried. Thank you very much, and we can endorse the letter. We will now move to item 3.2 in the agenda tonight, 18 Barry Street Q, proposed three-storey apartment development, PP 24/299. Tonight, Timothy Luckin, Senior Subdivision Officer, will present the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I present UPDC item number 3.2 relating to planning permit application PP 24/0299, 18 Barry Street Q. It is proposed to fully demolish the existing aged care facility and construct 5 triple-storey buildings containing a total of 60 apartments in a heritage overlay. The new apartment buildings will be constructed with board form concrete and stone cladding. In addition, bronze metal finishes are seen throughout the design as accent pieces. The development has been assessed by Council's internal experts, including urban designer, arborist, heritage advisor, ESD officer, drainage and traffic. All referrals are fully supportive of the development, subject to the recommended permit conditions. The permit applicant consulted with adjoining and nearby properties, giving them the opportunity to raise concerns directly with them. A total of 12 objections to the application have been received. It is considered that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit should be issued. The housing framework plan outlined in the Boroondara planning scheme describes the general residential zone Schedule 4 zoning as being able to support development at a greater density and building scale compared to the surrounding area and precinct, while maintaining amenity and character. Overall, the amended proposal meets the objectives and expectations of the planning scheme with regard to maximum building height, appropriate appropriate front setback transitions to adjoining properties and also garden area. The development, in combination with the recommended permit conditions, meet Res Code objectives and standards, including the amenity requirements, landscaping, accessibility, site coverage, and setbacks. Permit conditions are recommended to include angled or chamfered forms in the built form design at the northwest and southwest corners of the site to reference the pitched forms visible throughout the heritage streetscape at the recommendation of Council's Heritage Advisor and Urban Designer. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to public submissions. Two people have proposed to speak tonight. Again, I'll remind you of the 3-minute limit and starting with your name and suburb. So if I can call Michael Piccola to the table.
Good evening. I'm Michael Piccolo and I reside in Brighton. Good evening. I'm the Managing Director of Piccolo. I'm the applicant and also the landowner of 18 Barry Street, Kew. Piccolo is a family business that has been operating in Melbourne for over 50 years. We specialise in creating luxury apartments and I've always wanted to develop in Boroondara. The site of Barry Street presents a perfect opportunity in creating a Piccolo landmark development. At Piccolo, we take a lot of pride in our projects and we're always raising the bar in design and in apartment living. Often, we are consulted by the state government about improving housing standards. Over the years, we've been honoured to have received well over 30 state and national awards from the likes of the Institute of Architects and Property Council of Australia. Over the past 12 months with Barry Street, we've worked hard with the council officers, the local community, and our architects in creating a highly considered design that will be respectful of the surrounding neighbourhood. I have no doubt it will set a new standard for apartment living in Boroondara. Since purchasing the property, we have received an incredible level of interest from the public. To date, we have received well over 2,000 registrations from people interested in wanting to buy. We see the majority of the buyers coming from the local area of Boroondara, an older demographic, downsizing from large family homes. Finally, at Piccolo, we are committed to giving back to the community. We have been in discussion with Fiona Brown, Council's Community Manager, about Piccolo supporting a Boroondara Housing Association. We propose to make a financial contribution based on a percentage of our total sales revenue. We expect to make a contribution of approximately $180,000. I'm happy for Council this evening to add this commitment as a condition in their determination. Thank you. What I have here, I'll pass it around. This is the condition we're proposing.
Councillors, would you like a moment to have a read of that? That probably concludes the presentation, so I'd like to throw over to councillors for questions of the presenter tonight. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Piccola, for your presentation. And I'll be honest, I'm a little bit stunned by your generous gesture here, so thank you for that. My question was with the ESD.
Yes.
And I noticed just looking at the designs, and I understand they're predominantly concept and not working drawings as such yet, but is there any more capacity to put additional solar panels on?
Solar panels?
Yeah.
Look, it's something we can consider, yes.
I just realise obviously there's a lot of roof space there that still has capacity, and I thought in the interest of your potential occupiers of the building, I'm sure that would help with sustainability. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Stebro.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the offer. I'm assuming that's an unconditional offer regardless, right?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's right. Regardless, it's a company policy we have for all our developments. We made a very similar offer recently last year, and formed part of a planning permit for a project we got in the City of Yarra. So that formed part of the permit.
I'm more interested in obviously there's some objectives in the community, and I'm interested in the conversations and not the content of them, but the commitments and how committed your company is to address the issues.
Yeah, so we're in dialogue. 12. So I've written to all 12 objectors, inviting them to meet, and we're in dialogue with quite a few of the objectors in resolving their concerns. So we'll keep working on that. Yep.
And the officers are aware of that?
I believe so, yes.
I might ask the officers
okay.
At a later stage. Exhaust my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. This first one might be a question really for the officers, but and it might be too much detail for you right now, but just to check about that front fence, given that I know that has been an ongoing issue in terms of the height of the front fence. And at one stage in the report, it says that they'd be lowered to a maximum of 1.8, but it actually then says that under the conditions of 1.5 metres. Is that what?
Yeah, look, there is, because the land is sloping, so 1 point may be 1.5, but to a maximum of 1.8 metres. So we propose that at any point the fence won't be greater than 1.8 in height.
1.8 is still quite high. I'm very tall and I'm just over 1.8. I think that's quite high, right? Well, anyway, I guess my next question, I'm conscious that it needs to be a question, so I'm just thinking about it, is that relates to the minimum garden area requirement. I guess it was surprising to see that such a enormous piece of land that while it meets the garden area requirement, it's what I would call by the slimmest of margins. I think that the minimum is 35% and it's 35.1%. I wonder if you have any comment on that, because obviously, as you know, in Burundara, one of the things that our residents value the most is our trees and gardens and green area.
Yeah, look. For us, it was very important from day one to preserve the sort of garden, or sort of create a garden environment within the development. And working closely with our landscape architect, Acre, we felt we've created a sort of a balance between sort of gardened and built space and built form. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Chair, when the time's right, I think we need to get some governance advice with regards to what's been tabled before we make any decisions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There's no... Oh, sorry, there is. Councillor Sinfield has a question.
No, my question's not for the applicant. My question is not for the applicant.
Can it wait to officers' discussions later? Thanks very much. Okay, you can return to the gallery now. Thanks very much for your presentation.
Great, thank you.
I now call upon Vaughan Connor to join us at the table. If you could start with your name, even though I've just given it, and the suburb in which you live.
Thank you, Councillor or Chair and fellow councillors. My name's Vaughan Connor. I'm a Director at Contour Consultants and we act for Michael Piccolo, and I'm actually a resident of Studley Park as well. We're obviously here in support of the recommendation, and we thank Council for the opportunity to make this submission tonight. We also thank Council officers for their collaboration and thorough assessment, and for the neighbours and the community more generally for their engagement to date. In summary, this proposal involves the redevelopment of the site for 60 apartment-style dwellings in 5 detached buildings within a garden setting, and building heights being a maximum of 3 storeys. The 60 dwellings are supported by 131 car parking spaces for the residents, and then there's valet and visitor car parking. In terms of the planning credentials for the proposal, firstly, in policy terms, the site is identified on the Council's housing framework plan within the planning scheme as a candidate to support greater density and height. The recognition on the housing framework plan is accompanied by the general residential Schedule 4 zoning, which, as we heard from the officers, relates to supersized lots suited for medium density housing. The site is a very large site at over 8,000 square metres. The existing buildings are of no heritage significance, and there are no unmanageable site constraints. Existing trees are being retained, and significant new tree planting and landscaping is proposed. And regarding the design more generally, we say it's a sound response to Res Code. There's a range of ESD initiatives which are proposed. It's a high standard of internal amenity, and the 2 books I've just passed around there exhibit other Piccolo projects just to give the council's understanding of the strive for quality. And finally, in terms of the merits, we say that there's no unreasonable off-site impacts. We also note the following from Council's Urban Design Officer regarding the merits of the proposal. And she says, and I quote, "From an urban design perspective, the proposal offers a responsive and competent design outcome that strikes the right balance between development yield and targets and heritage and neighbourhood character." She also says, "It delivers an ensemble of seemingly individual buildings, meticulously scaled and judiciously positioned to respond to the unique site and setting, its varying interfaces and steep topography." Now, in addition to these supportive urban design comments, there's been favourable comments, as we've heard, from Council's arborist, traffic engineer, drainage engineer, ESD advisor, waste engineer and the heritage officer. It's comprehensively supported. I'm happy to answer any questions which councillors have, and I know there was a couple of technical questions put to Mr Piccolo then. Regarding ESD and reference to solar panels, condition 14 of the recommendation...
Mr Connor, can you wrap up your presentation? We'll come to questions in a moment.
Okay. All I say, I'm happy to answer any ESD or front fence related questions if that assists.
Councillors, are there questions of this presenter? Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. Sorry, I neglected to ask the previous presenter. Does your client accept all the conditions as per the officer's recommendation?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I'll just, to enable you to finish what you were going to say, I'll ask the question with regard to ESD and solar panels, and I'm looking at obviously Building E is fully equipped, and you were going to then add there is a condition for additional?
Yeah, condition 14 relates to ESD considerations and effectively requires a sustainability management plan. We would be happy to accept an additional condition. I think there's 3 subsets to that condition, A, B and C. We'd accept a condition D, which required us to investigate the additional solar panels being incorporated into the proposal.
Thank you. And if I may just finish the second part of the question, the reason I've emphasised this is because it's a gas-free property, it's all electric, so I think any additional solar certainly would be a benefit to all. I'll leave it there, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connell, that appears to have exhausted questions. You can return to the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I will now return to officers for matters arising, and in doing so, that includes planning and governance. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I might respond and maybe just make comment on and acknowledge the two speakers in support of the proposal, and obviously there's a significant alignment between what's been put forward and the officer recommendation. I would make some comment on the offer or proposal put forward in terms of a contribution in regard to a community housing association. This is something that officers were aware of in terms of the applicant's intent or proposal to consider the option of making a contribution as part of the project proposal. On the basis that officers or the council does not have a policy or guideline that relates to affordable housing or would guide outcomes that would expect or require or set an expectation for conditions to be included on permits that require a contribution to a housing association or for affordable housing. Officers were of the view that such a condition would not be an expectation or requirement and therefore has not been included in the recommendation put forward by officers. So officers support the proposal as put forward without that requirement or expectation. That doesn't mean that the applicant cannot and should not, or the developer cannot or should not still make such a contribution if that is a commitment being made by the developer. That is certainly open to them to continue to do so, but is not an expectation that officers are putting forward in their recommendation. It is not something that we've done on other development proposals or required, and we would, if council would intend to or would still seek to include such a condition, we would suggest or recommend that we would need to have a look at that condition and review it and consider the correct and appropriate words that would apply to such a condition.
I believe Mr. Storer would like to comment at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to largely support the view expressed by Mr. Walker, which is that we do not have a policy which in fact informs the making of such requests or indeed how they might be applied. That would be of a concern, particularly in circumstances where, in the absence of that, there may be those in our community who would be, I guess, concerned or adopting the view that perhaps council had in some way been enticed into making a decision by the offer which has been made. The second point I would make is that this council has consistently raised concerns about the prospect that development outcomes on sites would be somewhat of a larger scale or would produce different outcomes than those they aspired to as a consequence of offers like this being made. Council's always taken the view that the impact on amenity has been of more concern to it than the nature of outcomes associated with offers like this. It's not to say you can't take a different view, but I think in the absence of policy informing it, that would be unwise.
Thank you. Does that conclude officers' comments? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, we do have some further additional comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just in relation to the solar panel question, so in the ESD report submitted to Council, to meet best standards, which is applied to ESD objectives, they need to provide at least 5% of the development's estimated energy consumption through solar energy systems provided on site. So 5%, whereas what they're proposing is 19% on the rooftops. So this has been reviewed by our ESD officer, who's an expert in this matter, and they've supported what's been put forward. So that condition 14 just will reaffirm that when it gets endorsed at a later stage if we issue the permit. In relation to the front fencing question, I just want to clarify that condition 1F specifies that the maximum front fence height across both street frontages must be 1.6 metres maximum. So just wanted to clarify that condition. On top of that, there's a minimum of 50% of the length of front fences along each street frontage must be transparent by at least 25%. So what that's trying to achieve is, at the moment, they're solid fences, so we're trying to get an outcome where at least half the fencing is somewhat transparent, which could be achieved through metal battens or some other similar fencing, but not a solid fence. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now seeking questions from councillors. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say I very much appreciate the governance advice and hearing from the CEO as well. And I just want to make it clear that I certainly have not been influenced by the gesture of goodwill, and I am fairly confident that my councillor colleagues wouldn't be. But I just wanted to ask a question getting back to the 19% capacity with solar, and whether or not, if it was the will of the mover of a potential motion or whether the will of officers, if we could strive even higher with this bar and go for a 25%, because there seems to be the goodwill from the potential, the applicant.
Through you, Chair, we can suggest some wording which would prompt investigation of additional solar panel opportunities.
Thank you.
Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a question without a preamble. And it is this. It seems to me that given what's gone on tonight, that there ought to be a note as part of any approval that might be given that this decision has been reached without any regard to that proposed voluntary contribution. And I wonder if officers could turn their mind to a form of words for that note. It's not uncommon for us to add a note, obviously, and I think it's one that I'd like to see a form of words for consideration by whoever moves the motion.
I think that was addressed before, but I'll ask for further comment now.
Thanks, Chair. Through yourself. Planning permits can have a range of notes and guidance around the decision or what's been approved to provide information. It has no bearing on the requirements, expectations or enforceability of the permit, but can provide information and guidance, and we can include a suitable note if that is the will of the council.
Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Park?
Yeah, save that I'm talking about in the motion tonight, so it'll actually form part of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thank you. And just to be absolutely certain, on the question of the front fence, then you're saying that at no point will it be higher than 1.6 is what we've conditioned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And my second question, and I apologize because I'm sure it's in there somewhere, but it is a very long report. I just wanted to check on the Berry Street corner interface with 20 Berry Street. I noticed that on page, what I have as 118 of 143, it says that we've asked for an increase of 800 millimeters in the first and second floor setbacks, and then that the applicant then offered 800 millimeters for the second floor and only 400 millimeters for the first floor. I just wondered where that landed. It didn't feel, given that I thought had a strong point on that, I just wondered where that has finally landed. Do you want me to give you the page number again? Is that helpful? It's 118?
Yes, please, 118.
I have it as 118 out of the 143 pages, if that's what you're... Oh, they're always different, aren't they?
Is there a name of a heading or anything nearby?
Sorry, my document is now opened with another set of page numbers. So, well, it might have been actually in the, it was in the urban designers report, actually. So, which was, I think, page 118 within, now, that page number might also be wrong now, but it's in the urban designers report, which is marked in yellow. And I guess they made a specific point about that corner. I'm sure you know the corner I mean, in terms of the sight line across through to 20 Barry Street, and just felt that that was important.
Yes, I think I understand the question. So I guess the point to be made is there was several discussions about this setback, and the permit applicant put forward some increased setbacks as part of amended plans submitted after advertising. So I might just quote the report.
I guess the main question for me really is, rather than the exact specifics of each, was whether or not the urban designers ultimately satisfied with where those landed, where those discussions.
So what was put forward by them, we've then increased it to, I believe it was 9.2 metres, and that was reviewed by, let me just double check that before I, yes, so this is specifically about the balconies. So at first floor and second floor, we've vowed to increase it to 9.2 metres, and that's under the recommendation of both the urban designer and council's heritage advisor.
Great, thank you very much.
For that transition.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That seems to have exhausted questions of officers. I'll now...
I have some questions, Councillor Gold.
Cropped up again. Right, okay. Welcome back. Councillor Stavro.
Look, I just wanted to ask the officers, how have they addressed some of the concerns on the visual bulk and heritage that the community has made, particularly the transitions to 20 Barry Street, and whether they believe, I know that there's some conditions in the conditions, but have they addressed everything? Because I'm not 100% sure, and if they can elaborate on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I guess without any, I'm not sure exactly which type of measurements you might be alluding to, but I guess like in terms of like, for instance, building height, it's 3 stories, so it's within its maximum building height. One of our key considerations was looking at how that transition works, both in terms of height and setbacks. And when we've got height measurements for 20 Barry Street, and then we've got maximum height measurements for the building A, which is right next to it, proposed, and it's just under 1 metre lower than that house's ridgeline. So we felt like, and so did the council's urban designer and heritage advisor, that that was an appropriate transition. In terms of the setbacks, it's quite generous what's been provided there in our view, because Res Code really only requires them to do 9 metres. Our heritage policy would prefer setbacks to be closer to the 20 Barry Street setback, but given the context and how deep Barry Street is, it has 26 metres, it's quite difficult to achieve that. And in the report, we've addressed that by pointing out how much land area that would cost to match that setback. It's considered unreasonable from our perspective. So we've gone for this happy medium between the two, where a 12-metre setback is provided to the main building line. It's also not right up against the side boundary either, so there's a side setback as well provided. So overall, this has been looked at from multiple perspectives, urban design and heritage, as well as council officers' opinion, and we've concluded this is quite an appropriate transition.
Chair, I might just add, this is a great example of experts and officers undertaking a performance-based assessment of a proposal to reach a recommendation based on consideration of all of the factors that come into development assessments of this type.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. If I may continue, Chair, and so thank you for that. And that addresses the heritage issue. Is the heritage advice internal or is it external, independent advice?
It's, through yourself, Chair, it is a heritage consultant that is on a panel engaged by council.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. One of the other aspects that I would be looking to is there's quite a bit of garden associated in the balconies. It looks visually extensive, which softens somewhat the concrete. Other conditions, and I know there are 2 or 3 conditions there, are there enough for us to be able to guarantee that this doesn't shrivel up and just die after the development, and that it does become a feature as I'm assuming it's intended to be?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So we have landscaping conditions, so they have to get a landscape plan endorsed, which will show the planting at the balcony levels. Those planter boxes have a 600 millimetre depth to them, which is quite deep for balcony planter standards. So first of all, the plans will show that. And then secondly, we have a landscape condition that requires any of those sort of plants, if they die or they get poisoned or have a disease or something, to be replaced and maintained. So we can always enforce that down the track if something was to, if they were to wither away. On top of that, the landscape plans need to show irrigation systems. So we're expecting this to be an automated watering system, so it doesn't rely on individual owners to water them. And then finally, there's also a landscape management condition. So this is separate to the plan itself, but we want them to put forward a plan that shows how these landscaped areas will be managed over time through maintenance. So if you're looking for that condition, it is condition 12. So landscaping maintenance management plan.
So if I may, I think you've answered my question. That's the issue that I'm concerned about, the future residents, and obviously some would be from this municipality buying in, that it doesn't fall on them to maintain. Who does the condition, I guess, who must satisfy the performance of that condition going forward?
I think that's been answered, Councillor Stavro.
I'm not 100% sure, as I said, Councillor Gold. You may be. In the event that it doesn't work, I guess is what I'm saying, and who's up for the performance of that condition?
So I guess depending on exactly how it's subdivided, it would be probably expected that these balconies are within their own lots. So likely it could be on the owners to maintain it. However, this plan still outlines how it must be done, so we can still enforce that plan down the track.
I understand. I might have a condition then on that to make sure that it's open and transparent, that it will be part of the design and it's not going to affect the future owner. So
Thank you, Councillor Stavro. Does that exhaust your questions
Look,
at this point in time?
in due course, I might be ready to move a motion as well.
Thank you. I think we've arrived at that point.
Okay. A couple of things. First, I'd give a bit of time and for the officers to come up with a condition that may be appropriate for what I think my intent is understood.
So can we have the outline of your motion, for instance?
Well, I'm going to that. It will be the officer's recommendation, but it will need... I would like to add a small variation there if appropriate, and more importantly to take up what Councillor Park mentioned a bit earlier, and some of the words that are in governance to be included as notes to the motion this evening.
Thanks, Chair. Poppy, can I just perhaps touch on the landscaping expectations and requirements? Council officers are quite confident that the landscaping plan condition is quite comprehensive in its expectations for the plan and the subsequent maintenance of the landscaping within the development. Now, that condition is a robust condition that is suitable and will live with the life of the development, irrespective of the subdivision approach that the developer takes to the site. So we don't know whether all lots will be subdivided into their individual components. We don't know which components will be included within common property and which will be subdivided into the individual lots. And we feel the condition that is there will cover all of those different scenarios. In terms of the suitability of notes, they have been provided to governance and can be included in the resolution.
Thank you. And one more thing, I noticed that through Councillor Hollingsworth questioning, the officers took on board the solar panels issue. Could we, just to be more specific, add a condition to ensure that 25% cut-off is included, or a 25% solar panel increase is included? Because I think it doesn't make sense.
Through you, Chair, the condition we've drafted seeks for an exploration of opportunities to improve above the 19%. It doesn't, well, our advice is to not mandate a specific number.
Is there, okay, I'll take that on board. Well, thank you for that. Then if we can show the motion as with the changes.
Councillor Stavro, are you happy with that amendment?
Look, it's okay. I wonder if the officers would contemplate maximisation with, obviously, in line with the discussion to maximise whatever is feasible.
Through yourself, Chair, officers would be comfortable with investigation of the provision of maximum possible additional solar panels and inclusion of additional panels where opportunity is identified. Would be that certainly can be an objective as part of the design outcome. Officers aren't prepared to commit to a specific percentage on the basis that an analysis hasn't been done of what the capacity is or the design opportunity is to achieve that percentage, and that would be a flawed condition in the view of officers if we were to include that.
That makes a lot of sense. So long as there's a drive to maximise the outcome, that would be really good. And it would be appropriate also to read the note out to the community.
There's further amendments further down, yep. Councillor Stavro. Are you happy with that note?
Look, can see the intent, and it's certainly my intent, and I think a lot of the councillors in this room. And if that's governance sees that the word appropriate, I'm happy with that.
Yes, that was the document. That was the wording that's been drafted.
Can I clarify that, please?
To do with this point?
Yeah.
Certainly.
Does that imply it won't be accepted under any circumstance, as opposed to it's not an influencer in the decision?
Yeah. But can I just, we might need to, I don't know whether we need to suspend standing or discuss this, but I just it seems to me that it's not, the way this has been written anyway, it's not necessarily an offer that we would accept or not accept anyway. It doesn't involve us in many ways, right? So I don't know that, I mean, if they choose to give a donation of some sum to a housing association that is not associated with us, that's their choice. We would not want to say you cannot do that. What we want to say, I think, is that a decision to do that or not is not relevant to our decision, the decision that was made here tonight.
I think that's what this note says, that it's outside what we're considering tonight. It may well lie on the table, but it's not part of this process tonight. Is that correct?
The way that I read it is it's not precluding, but we're not supporting it.
We're not supporting it, or we're not using it to influence our decision tonight?
It is not supported by and has not influenced council decision on this matter. So if they choose to make an offer, as I understand Councillor Bigger saying outside this forum, this is not...
Well, I just don't think we should need to go into whether it's supported or not, because that's irrelevant, because it doesn't involve us. It's third parties.
It was drafted by the CEO. Do we need to adjourn briefly?
Yeah, I think so. Can I
have a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
Which one? Councillor Stavro, you seem to be the first on. Are you? Yep. Councillor Bigger, I'll take it from you. Do we have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to move or second.
We have a mover and a seconder. We shall adjourn for a moment. Thank you. On motion, all those in favour? Unanimous. We are adjourned. Returning to Councillor Stavro. Oh, sorry. Returning to Councillor Stavro. Are you happy with the motion as currently amended?
I am, Councillor Gold. Thank you. Chair.
Either way. Do we have a seconder for the motion as it currently stands? Councillor Thompson?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to the motion as it now stands?
Not opposed, but can we just see the whole thing again? Is there another change to it in addition to this note? Just remind me.
There is further up. Okay.
Could the word panel be made plural, please?
I would support that.
Councillor Stavro?
Yeah.
Councillor Thompson? Fantastic. We're off and running. Is anyone opposed to the motion as it currently stands? Okay. Councillor Stavro, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the first thing is that we acknowledge that the well-intentioned offer, but as noted, it's been added as a note to make sure that we are in the right place, and perhaps that we ought to be thinking about a future policy around these areas going forward. But with regards to this this proposal, obviously we all in our community is telling us we would like to have our community full of charming houses and that fit the neighbourhood. But sometimes that's not appropriate, and also we need to acknowledge the need for diversity of housing as well, and what was in place before it, and what we're dealing with a very sizable lot. I certainly listen to my residents and their anxieties about the increased density, the potential overshadowing, the overlooking, and a lot of those issues that the officers, with hard work, and obviously the developer is all participated in this, in discussion with the community, to iteratively make some changes that will make improvements. And as Mr. Walker said, this is a classic example of the ability to have this local rendition of council trying to achieve appropriate outcomes for the community in ways where perhaps a fixed and prescribed approach would probably not work as well. So a lot of work has been put in by the officers, and I think the proposal shows about that. And I also would say that the developer is also to be commended to a certain degree, in putting forward what appears to be a very good design. Note my comments earlier, but in the context of where we are, a good design for what needs to be built in that area, given the rules and regulations. So without further ado, I don't want to labour the point. I think the condition says it all, and the report was extensive. I commend the motion to my fellow councillors.
Unless any other councillors feel an absolutely pressing need to comment, I will now move. Councillor Thompson.
Just very briefly, I will acknowledge what the officers mentioned before, that this application and the work that the officers have done with the applicant have actually produced a very good outcome for our community. I think this is a very appropriate design solution. And in the light of the changes that are coming up, it's even more appropriate at this moment in time.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I will now put the motion. All in favour? It is unanimous. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. I will now move to item 3.3 on the agenda, 136 High Street, Glen Iris, proposed two-dwelling development, PP 24/0570. Tonight, Edward Howe, Urban Planner, will present the officer's report. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. UPDC item 3.3 relates to planning permit application PP 23/0570 at 136 High Street in Glen Iris. The application seeks to retain and extend the existing single-storey building on the site and construct a second dwelling at the rear, replacing an existing car park. The current use of the building on the site is for a medical centre, the operation of which has been enabled through a number of permits. If a permit is granted and acted upon, the use enabled under permission would cease. 12 objections were received to the application. A consultation meeting was held following notification of the application with nearby residents and the permit applicant to hear concerns and discuss how home businesses are considered under the planning scheme. It is recommended that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit should be issued. Permit conditions are recommended to lower the overall height of Unit 2 and provide a more appropriate built form transition, to meet Res Code standards and objectives, and to make access and drainage changes in accordance with internal advisors' recommendations. Thank you.
We will now move to public submissions. Tonight, there are 4 in the audience who wish to present. I will start with Mr. Mark Turnbull. If you'd like to join us at the table. Mr. Turnbull, I'd like to remind you there's a 3-minute limit on your presentation, and if you wouldn't mind starting with your name and the suburb in which you live. Thanks very much.
Good evening and thank you very much. My name is Mark Turnbull and I am from Glen Iris. I will try to make it succinct as quickly as possible.
Excuse me, sir, could you please go closer to the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that better? Right, okay. Moving along, one of the major concerns is, as you are aware, the applicant is actually making an application for a residential permit and will cease operating the medical chiropractic business that he operates on the property. The current premises has 8 car parks with an additional 4 car parks at the front of the building. With the development, those 8 car parks will be lost. There'll be an additional crossover, which will probably take out one of the car parks as well. What the real concern is that if the current applicant does at some point in time decide to operate a business from that premises, he can do so under the home-based businesses provisions without having to apply for a permit. Now, whether he needs to apply for a permit in relationship to a medical practice, I'll take your view on board with that. But in doing so, if he does decide to operate a business from that premises, it then starts to cause a bit of an issue with regards to car parking. The car parking provisions that I've said that are on that premises will be gone. A car park will potentially be gone through an overpass. And then if people wish to visit that premises, then they'll be, at that stage, they'll have to park out in the street and be an encumbrance to local residents. The other thing also is the cost of building the premises is estimated at $1 million. That's pretty good in the sense that I question as to whether that's a realistic build estimate cost and whether it will reflect upon the quality of the build, and also whether it will enhance, will cause issues later on if there's not enough capital put into the proposed development. So that's basically where I'm at.
Mr. Turnbull, that's your presentation?
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillors, is there any questions of this presenter? Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Assuming that this, because obviously we just have to take the application right now is not for a business on the site, assuming that there is no business on the site in the future, are you otherwise happy with the application? Are you otherwise?
Well, the other thing is that I've just mentioned was the estimated build cost of $1 million as to whether that will impact upon the quality of the build with regards to the materials that are used, etc.
Okay, well, we'll ask the officers to, I'm sure they'll respond to that, but otherwise that's your main concerns about parking?
That's what my concern is, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There appears to be no further questions. You may return to the gallery, Mr. Turnbull. Thank you for your presentation. I now call upon Melanie Erdley. Again, if you could start with your name and suburb. Thank you.
Melanie Erdley. I live in Glen Iris. Thank you for saying my surname correctly. Normally I get Erdley. I'm talking about the neighbourhood character for this development. We're concerned that this build will erode our neighbourhood character as it has not respected the streetscape and it does not respond to the context in which it sits. Under the clause 55.02 of the planning scheme for neighbourhood character and infrastructure, it states to ensure that the design respects the existing neighbourhood character or contributes to a preferred neighbourhood character. We feel this only achieves this through the fact that it's 2 stories and only 2 on the block. This application does not take into account the architectural style and era of surrounding buildings. The majority of houses in Hilltop Avenue and both properties abutting this property are heritage homes. This build will clash with the existing streetscape. As the corner property and the entrance to our street, it will have a huge impact to the High Street and Hilltop streetscape, and it will eliminate the heritage character of our area. There are only approximately 5 non-heritage houses in our street. This design is not even in keeping with the contemporary homes being built in our area that are clean, smooth designs. This design is, for want of a better word, messy. It has not followed Boroondara's guidelines for design and construction and expectations in this area. It has not limited architectural features like porches, verandas and porticos to single-storey height. There are 2 balconies on the top floor of Unit 1 and 1 balcony on the top floor of Unit 2. The roof form is not tiled as per other surrounding houses. Unit 1 and 2 have completely different roof forms from each other, creating no uniformity even between themselves. This property was part of the Mont Iris Heritage Overlay only a couple of years ago. This house was deemed to be important to our area. Unfortunately, the overlay did not proceed, but this does not take away from the fact this property was an important part of Boroondara's heritage feel and our neighbourhood. We are not against development. Our wishes are that this applicant had considered Boroondara's Guide to Retaining Neighbourhood Character. If this had been an extension of the existing home and retained the architectural style, it could have been an amazing house, and most likely we would all not be here tonight. There is no point having these guidelines if any applicant can totally disregard it. We would like to plead to the owner to reconsider this application and respect the neighbours that will still be here long term. Thank you.
Thank you for your prompt presentation. We have a question from, we haven't a question from anyone at this point in time. So you may return to the gallery. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I now call upon Malcolm Smith to join us at the table. Again, Mr. Smith, if you could start with your name and suburb. Thank you.
Malcolm Smith, Glen Iris. We've lived at 138 High Street for 27 years. In that time, we've raised our family, enjoyed the benefits of living in the area and provided a great sense of space and privacy for us. The development of 136 High Street will have a severe negative effect on our environment and our lives going forward. We understand the development of the area is inevitable, but this should be done in a manner that complements the area, not dominates it. The development of 136 High Street is significant in size, and we're extremely concerned and distressed that this development will proceed as proposed. Our primary concern is our loss of secluded, open, private space. I make a number of points. The shadow diagram, attachment 3.35, depicts the shadow at 3 p.m. on the 22nd of September. This denotes the shadows cast by the proposed new building. This increased shadow may comply with the regulations, but it's of the area of the backyard that we actually use the most. And I'm also concerned that the shadow we may have may be far more severe during the summer months. In section 9.2, the neighbourhood character, the section states, the neighbourhood residential zone, Schedule 3, seeks to provide for development that maintains the spacious character, including the consistent spine of backyards and low site coverage to ensure the development responds to smaller lot sizes, narrower side setbacks, smaller front and rear gardens, and a higher site coverage of some inner urban areas. The proposed development does not meet this, and there is no spine of backyards. In section 9.22, the siting, I believe the secluded open spaces should be of 4 metres, as per standard B6 stipulates, rather than the proposed 3.57 and the 3.05 metres. The building height and form, which is 9.23, the proposed condition of reducing the height by Unit T2 by 300 metres, 300 mil, seems very small given the steep fall from the north to the south of 3.4 metres. I reiterate, we're not against the development. However, the proposal as it currently stands will have a hugely negative impact on our lives. The reduction of height of the rear unit by 300 mil does not go any way to alleviating our concerns.
Thank you, Mr Smith. We have a question from Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Smith, for your presentation. Given that officers are recommending a reduction in the height of that unit 2 at the back of the property, what height do you believe is appropriate to reduce the impact on your private secluded open space?
We would much prefer at least 1.2 metres reduction.
1.2. And just a clarification on your presentation, you mentioned, and sorry, I missed that because I want the officers to respond to this. You said you mentioned 4 metre preferred, but you gave examples of 3.57 and 3.05 metres. Could you just indicate what that was in relation to?
That's in relation to, in the citing, in 9.2.2.
9.2.2. I'll ask officers maybe to refer to that when they respond.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Mr Smith, that appears to have exhausted questions. You may return to the gallery. Thanks for your presentation. I call upon Stephen Kerr.
Hello.
Hello. If you could, again, could you start with your name and suburb?
Stephen
Thank you.
Kerr, Glen Iris. I'm the owner of 1 Hilltop Avenue, so I'm the property directly abutting the development in question to the south. I object to the officer's recommendations on the grounds that the development will have a detrimental impact to the character of the streetscape through the visual bulk, specifically to us in relation to our building and the height and setback. Difference between Unit 2 and our property at 1 Hilltop Avenue. In the planning team's own words, or the officer's own words, under section 9.2.3, building height and form, page 336, if you just indulge me for a second, it says, given the sloping nature of Hilltop Avenue, the built form rising alongside the southern boundary presents as a stark increase in scale adjacent to the more traditionally pitched roof of 1 Hilltop Avenue, and has a detrimental impact to the character of the streetscape through visual bulk. So these are the words in the report. A more sensitive approach to the scale of Unit 2 is required to respond to the specific site characteristics and provide a more appropriate transition in scale to 1 Hilltop Avenue to the south. So I couldn't have said it any better myself. If you look at the plans on page 389, I mean, the ground floor of Unit 2 will start roughly, I might be slightly out, but about 1.9 metres above our ground floor. And the actual setback, given, obviously I know it's within code, but the setback of our property on the second story is halfway back through the block, and this building will sit basically in our front yard space, obviously on the abutting property. So there's a huge transition from that building to our front yard and our property. The planning team's assertion on page 337 that to drop the overall height by 300 mil, and in their words, will respond more appropriately to the sloping site and surrounding context, I don't see that as a reasonable position to take for such a large structure, given the significant disparity in height and setback that we're looking at between Unit 2 and 1 Hilltop Avenue. We did provide an alternative, which Mal touched on. We did ask the officers to have a look at dropping the basement to ground level instead of starting 1.2 metres above ground level. And I appreciate the officer did have a look at that for me. Apparently, it couldn't be possible under the design standards. However, the 300 mil reduction that has been suggested is not appropriate compromise to deal with the visual bulk. So I still think that the initial report still stands even with a 300 mil reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. You clearly have covered all the points. There's no questions. So if you can return to the gallery, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
I will now return to officers for matters arising. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Starting off with comments made by Mr. Turnbull regarding the existing use and the potential future use. The planning system is bound to assessing an application as it's submitted, and this application proposed the construction of 2 dwellings with the residential use. This use of the dwellings does not require a planning permit and is not a planning matter up for discussion. Notwithstanding that the applicant has indicated that the use will not continue, the permitted medical use, as indicated before, will cease upon taking benefit from any planning permit allowing the development as proposed. A planning permit will be required to commence a new use of the site as a medical centre, subject to assessments, including for car parking provision. With regard to home-based business, that is governed under particular provisions at clause 52.11. A permit may be required for the use of the site as a home-based business pursuant to conditions regarding square meterage of use of a dwelling as for the home-based business and number of off-site employees. Regardless of requiring a planning permit, however, any amenity matters arising from the operation of the site as a home-based business, these are enforceable matters under the planning and can be brought to the attention of the planning department for investigation if there's any off-site amenity impacts. Essentially, with home-based businesses, the idea is that the business use is invisible, should be perceived as a dwelling. With respect to the development cost, as indicated on the application form raised by Mr. Turnbull, the applicant has actually reconfirmed the cost of the development is as instructed from the owner at the time of lodgement. And I should stress that the assessment is made on, the planning assessment is made on the basis of the materials selected, not the value of a number that's put down on the application form. That number dictates the application fee. It is considered that the response put forward by the applicant is of an appropriate material quality that's with respect to the neighbourhood character of predominantly brick buildings. Ms. Erdley made reference to the heritage overlay history on this site. A heritage overlay was never on this property. As indicated, it was a prospective site under investigation, and it was proposed to be included under the Mont Iris Estate and Environs Precinct. However, this heritage precinct, as I'm sure you're all aware, was abandoned due to a lack of coherence and a high degree of non-contributory properties. So the site and the surrounding area does not actually have any heritage significance as within the planning scheme. With regards to comments around res code and neighbourhood character, starting with res code raised by Mr. Smith, this application is fully compliant subject to conditions. These conditions relating to res code being as indicated in the report, setting back or altering the east wall of Unit 1 on the ground floor and the first floor. the proposal is fully compliant with the other Res Code standards. Moving on to neighbourhood character. The proposal was found to be an appropriate response for within the neighbourhood character. The pitched roof, excuse me, I lost my notes. The pitched roof and the materiality, as indicated before, while the neighbourhood character guideline for SPOS areas of minimum 4 metre dimensions have not been fully achieved with a 3.05 metre dimension for Unit 2 and a 3.5 metre dimension for Unit 1. It's considered acceptable given the areas of private open space in the front setbacks, and also noting that the proposal is compliant with Standard B28. I should also note that the arborist has reviewed the application and determines that these areas are capable of providing for meaningful canopy tree planting, with conditions addressing the planting of 4 canopy trees across the open areas of the development. And with respect to Mr. Kerr commenting on the discussion with regards to lowering the basement, that was discussed at the consultation meeting. However, further discussions, as indicated, were had with Council's traffic engineer on the viability of doing so, lowering the development further into the ground. However, given standard requirements for basement ramps and headroom clearance heights, this could not be done, as a longer basement ramp would be needed, which would in turn push the east wall closer to number 138 High Street and likely result in significant built form changes beyond a reasonable amenity impact to those neighbours at 138 High Street. A more appropriate condition to reduce the building height of Unit 2 would result in appropriate transition within the topography of Hilltop Avenue, noting that the resulting wall height for Unit 2 would be 7.1 metres. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. There are some questions from councillors. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. The officers, with regard to the front setback, is it possible to bring it forward towards High Street, or is there a reason why it's positioned where it is? And look, the reason I ask that is because listening to Mr. Kerr, and with regard to Unit 2 and the property being built very close to his boundary and right on the edge of the easement, I ask whether or not it was possible to bring everything forward 1 metre, for example.
Through you, Chair. The application as proposed is to retain the existing building that forms the ground floor, the majority of the ground floor of Unit 1.
Yes, which, yeah, I see what you're saying. There's no capacity then. Yeah, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Just a question regarding what one of the presenters, I think it was the first presenter, that made a comment regarding that it doesn't meet the guideline or our Bundara guidelines. Could you please comment on that, and if it doesn't, what the rationale?
Chair, through yourself, I might just perhaps initially answer that question and see if Mr. Howe wants to add anything further. And I think what the reference there was to some of the submissions, or one of the submissions primarily indicating that the proposal does not meet the guidelines, and I think the reference there is in regard to the neighbourhood character guidelines. Now, officers have undertaken a comprehensive assessment of the proposal, taking into consideration all the Res Code objectives, in regard to the development outcomes and expectations, including the neighbourhood character aspects of Res Code and having reference to our neighbourhood character strategy and the expectations for this particular location, and form the view that on balance it is an acceptable, appropriate and supportable neighbourhood character outcome.
So this is an example where there's judgment in terms of the local rendition and application of broader rules. Is that what you would say to that?
Through yourself, Chair, absolutely. That's exactly what has occurred here. And perhaps it's worth pointing out that in the scenario of the Res Code changes that we talked about earlier being implemented, the neighbourhood character judgment component is in fact taken out of Res Codes altogether. So this is an example where we are actually making a judgment on that neighbourhood character. We would have no capacity to make that judgment if those Res Code changes were to be brought in.
Thank you, Mr Walker. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair, through you two officers. A couple of clarifications, and I thank the officers for clarifying the 3.05 metres, which I believe was relating to overshadowing. That was correct, wasn't it?
Through you, Mr Chair, the 3.05 metres, I believe, was relating to the secluded private open space dimension for Unit 1.
So with that in mind, for Unit 1, not for Unit 2. So this is Unit 1 casting a shadow onto adjoining private open space, or is it Unit 2?
Through yourself, Chair, my recollection and my understanding of what's occurring here is there is an expectation under Res Code of a setback requirement for the secluded private open space and open space areas within the unit development. Yep. The submitter or adjoining resident has put forward a proposition that that should be increased to meet the standard of Res Code, or the prescriptive standard of Res Code, and as a consequence of that increase, there would be a beneficial reduction in the shadow cast over to the adjoining property. Right. So they're actually, it's a consequence of meeting the standard for secluded private open space within the property, but that standard doesn't relate to shadowing in itself. It's the beneficial impact of that change on the adjoining shadowing.
Is there, if I can rephrase my question slightly different, is there a beneficial impact as a result of the reduction in height that the officers are proposing?
Through you, Chair, yes, there will be, across the a lot of the standards, a improved outcome through overshadowing, for one, visual bulk, another, side and rear setbacks, another. A lot of the standards that revolve around the built form of the development and the impacting amenity.
So my next question relates to Mr Kerr presented, the last presenter, in relation to 9.2.3, which refers to the officer's comments about, I guess, neighbourhood character and the visual bulk created by the application, and the words in here talk about its disadvantage to the adjoining property. But it goes on to say that it will, if you could reduce the property lower, dig it into the ground a bit further, that would be more beneficial, but you can't do that, so the officer's recommendation is 300 millimetres. That's the basis of what we're all considering.
Through you, Mr Chair. It is not that the sinking it into the ground further is more beneficial than a reduction in wall height, as the recommended condition states or seeks to do. It's that that option was discussed at the consultation meeting and was included in the delegates' report as a way of justification of why it wasn't pursued. It's not a question of what is more beneficial than the other. It is that both would result in the same outcome of a reduced height that is in line with the topography of Hilltop Avenue, and provide a more appropriate transition between the existing building to be constructed on and number 1 Hilltop Avenue.
If I can just ask another question in relation to that. So by reducing the height by 300 millimetres, I think you mentioned the impact occurs at the basement level and therefore you cannot drive a motor vehicle into a basement if it's reduced further. Set that aside, from a visual bulk perspective, is 300 an acceptable outcome, or would a greater reduction in height be a better outcome for neighbourhood character?
Through yourself, Chair, perhaps if I just answer that question as well. The 300 millimetre reduction is an acceptable outcome. That's the officer position. The officer view is that it's an acceptable outcome in terms of the neighbourhood character, in terms of the building bulk, in terms of the scale, in terms of the relationship with adjoining property, that is an acceptable and appropriate outcome.
And through you, Chair, I might just add to that the site and rear setback standard, which is the appropriate standard to judge the visual impact on the property, Mr. Smith's property. The proposal does meet that standard and is therefore deemed to comply, and that is without the 300 mil reduction in height.
Okay, that's an important statement in relation to what was presented earlier this evening. So if I can just, a couple of questions. So officers, your conditions bring into full compliance with Res Code, and in your opinion, neighbourhood character is appropriate?
Yes.
Okay. If this was considered in 12 months' time with new Res Code standards that were per item 3.1 that we considered earlier this evening, would any of these objectives that officers have recommended been put forward, or would it have deemed to have complied on application?
Through you, Chair, there would be a number of opportunities to increase the building footprint and off-site amenity impacts if considered under what has been discussed tonight as a proposal from the state government to change Res Code. With no provision for the residents to object or take to VCAT, obviously. There would be a provision for objectors to object, or residents to object. If the application was deemed to comply, there would be no ability for those objectors to challenge any decision of council to approve the application.
Perhaps just to add to that as well, the other element is that if it's deemed to comply, council must approve it and cannot add additional conditions to change any of those outcomes. So you are in a much lesser position of power, influence or consideration under the deemed to comply scenario.
Caught between a rock and a hard place. So just to hone in, last question, the conditions actually make for a better outcome, according to officers, than the future planning provision that we've spoken about?
If a development was to be put forward meeting the maximum deemed to comply requirement under the Res Code changes that are put forward, absolutely it's a much better outcome what you are considering this evening.
Okay, I'll foreshadow a motion when the time's appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Yep, thank you. I have to say, so much mention of deemed to comply is slightly confusing for me right now, and probably potentially for some of the people in the gallery, or maybe it's just me. But can I just clarify that when you referred to deemed to comply, to this application, it's not relevant. We're talking about something in the future that might be. We're not talking about tonight. Is that correct?
I can absolutely understand the confusion, and perhaps I will clarify that for you. I mentioned earlier when discussing the Res Code changes that the housing statement last year flagged a future series of changes to the planning system to support increased housing. There were changes made to Res Code in September last year, shortly after that housing statement, and it introduced a series of deemed to comply Res Code standards at that point in time, and it related to things like the building heights and side setbacks. So there are already Res Code standards that are deemed to comply. What it didn't do is make provisions such as the neighbourhood character considerations deemed to comply at that time. So we're currently in a shandy situation where some standards are deemed to comply and we must agree to those, where other standards have a discretionary or objective performance-based component. So the future changes will remove the last stand, if you like, of those objective-based, performance-based components. So when we talk deemed to comply tonight on some of those elements, when officers have referenced it's deemed to comply, those standards have already been changed to deemed to comply.
Apart from the neighbourhood character, because there was a reference to neighbourhood character.
There are other ones, but neighbourhood character is probably the main one that has not changed at this point.
Thank you for that. So can I just, again, I was going to raise this point that Mr. Kerr made as well on page 336, which Councillor Thompson did, but I just want to clarify that you know, that what we've said here, that having a detrimental impact to the character of the streetscape, that officers are confident that the change that's being, the condition that is being applied is addressing that in full.
Through you, Chair, that it will certainly improve the outcome in relation to those concerns raised, and that is keeping in mind that the side and rear setback is already met in terms of the standard and that being deemed to comply. So there is perhaps a parameter in terms of how far we can push this.
Okay. If I might, then can I just clarify? I thought from the pictures that Unit 1, is that not the existing house further up the hill? Is that correct? On this page, though, we say that the final sentence there says, a more sensitive approach to the scale of Unit 2 is required to respond to the specific site characteristics and provide a more appropriate transition in scale from Unit 1 to Number 1 Hilltop Avenue. So I'm not quite sure I understand those two are not side by side. Unit 1 and Number 1 Hilltop.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Unit 2 is proposed to be constructed a new dwelling next to Unit 1, which is the existing dwelling, with Number 1 Hilltop Avenue, the next down towards the south. They are, if you look to the streetscape, one of the streetscape elevations showing Hilltop Avenue, it shows the built form as it goes down Hilltop Avenue.
if I can just clarify through yourself, Chair, this is saying that Unit 2, getting the height of Unit 2 correct and right will ensure there is a stepping down from Unit 1 to 1 hilltop. So it's the unit in between, so that the 3 units have a stepping between each of them.
Thank you, that makes much more sense. I just didn't understand the relationship there. Can I just ask, I know there was a consultation between the applicant and objectors. Were there conditions, were there agreements that came out of that consultation that have addressed the objectors that were concerns?
Through you, Chair. There were no conditions that came out of it. The consultation meeting was to, number one, be a forum where the residents and concerned members of the community could speak to the applicant, and two, to communicate a lot of the, what came out of a lot of the objector responses was the concern that the medical centre use would continue and that the a home-based business could be started, or the medical centre use would just continue outright as it is permitted. So the consultation meeting was in part to communicate some of the planning scheme triggers and assessments and what would be required if, you know, the home-based business use was to commence, and any potential future use scenarios that community members had concerns about.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that satisfies my questions.
Thanks very much. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. Look, perhaps I haven't been listening closely enough, but does it comply? We seem to be going round and I'm just now a little unclear.
Through you, Chair.
And are there any, I'm assuming there are minor non-compliances, but they're not substantial?
So there are a number of conditions that are recommended. One of them, as mentioned before, there's a non-compliance with standard B17 relating to side and rear setbacks, as it impacts, it's on the east wall, as it impacts the boundary with 138 High Street. These are minor non-compliances and will be are addressed via condition.
So sorry, outside the conditions, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that.
With Res Code, no, it is fully compliant. With neighbourhood character, as raised, the minimum 4 metre dimension in the guidelines for the neighbourhood character precinct, that is not met, though it is an acceptable outcome considering the generous amount of private open space provided on the site as a result of the deep setback for the dwelling to be retained and constructed on.
Thank you. So just to follow up, so should this be refused, what would be the time span that it would need to be revisited before, I mean, to put it bluntly, it'll get worse for the...
Through yourself, Chair, we don't know. We don't know when the Res Code provisions will be introduced, the new changes, the full deemed to comply. We don't know when they are going to come into the planning scheme. We understand that they're contemplated actually quite soon. So, in fact...
There was talk about December, wasn't there?
In fact,
it's a possibility?
In fact, our understanding is that it may well even be before then, for the next round of Res Code changes. So certainly this year, and our understanding is well before then.
Okay, thank you.
But we don't know.
No.
We don't have a clear answer.
No. Fair enough, thank you.
Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Just in line with the question by Councillor Addis, I mean, clearly this is sort of a balancing argument that you're making, and this has happened before where there's minor non-compliances that are dealt on balance, right? Post the conditions, I'm assuming.
Yes, through yourself, Chair, absolutely. And perhaps just to recap on the point made by Mr Howe, that with conditions, all of the res code will be met in terms of objectives and standards. It is in regard to the neighbourhood character component, and on balance and on assessment, given the spaciousness around the dwelling, the space for landscaping and the design elements for the dwelling, we're of the view that those minor variations are acceptable and appropriate.
And if I may follow, and the kind of sort of confused thinking that the proposed future changes might create, that hasn't affected this at all, I'm assuming. Is that
Not at
rhetorical?
all.
No.
Not at all. The officer assessment is based on what is before us and the current rules as they stand today.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson, you have a further question?
I do, just not to dwell on it too much, but just picking up on Councillor Addis, if council was of a mind to refuse this, given the changes that are coming, could the applicant simply just put in the original amendment and we'd need to then approve that based on what you've said? The original application.
Well, again, that's a speculation as to when the res code changes come in and the final form of those, but yes, that would be a possibility. I haven't got clarification of whether all of those new standards have been complied with, because officers haven't done that sort of assessment, but that may well be a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
That seems to have exhausted questions. Given the time of night, I'd like to move directly on to a motion. Councillor Thompson, you did.
I did foreshadow.
Opposed, a motion?
Yeah, I did foreshadow a motion, and I loathe the fact that I'm seeking to move the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Addis, you're happy to second that?
Yes, with equal trepidation, but yes.
Is there any opposition to the motion? There is none. Are there any, well, Councillor Thompson, go for your life.
I think I owe it to my residents to talk to this a little bit, Chair. I think councillors and council to itself are actually caught between a rock and a hard place with this change in reforms that are coming our way. Whilst this is not a perfect application, and it's certainly not the most aesthetic application, it is by far a better outcome than what might be presented to us in 6 months or 3 months or whenever this new legislation comes in. It would be very easy for us to turn around and do a refusal now, and that would bring a very short period of joy for a few residents, but unfortunately the end outcome would be contrary to that, and we'd actually have a worse urban built outcome that could affect those residents. I don't like this. I was contemplating a notice of refusal. I think the officers are presented on the basis that if it was refused, VCAT would look very kindly on the applicant in relation to where we've actually got to in light of things. So I think it is what it is. This is the nature of the planning system that we're in at the moment, and I trust that the applicant builds this to a very high quality as per what they've indicated to the officers. So I recommend this to my colleagues.
As there is no one opposed, I'm proposing to move straight to putting this motion unless anyone feels greatly inspired to speak. No. I will now put the motion. All of those in favour? The motion is carried. Thank you. Now, councillors, we move to item 3.4, but just saying the time of the evening, we have very little time left ahead of us before we have to extend this meeting. So we'll try and be reasonably prompt in getting through this one. So item 3.4, 91 to 93 Canterbury Road and 1 Wentworth Avenue, Canterbury, proposed 3-storey apartment and 2-storey townhouse development, PP 23/0987. Tonight, Aileen Chin, Principal Urban Planner, will present the officer's report. Thank you.
Good evening, all. The proposal seeks to construct a triple-storey building comprising 11 apartments and 2 double-storey townhouses across 3 lots at 91 to 93 Canterbury Road and 2 Wentworth Avenue, Canterbury. This is a repeat application on the site. A previous application also sought a permit for a similar proposal, which was refused under delegation. This decision was upheld by the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. The application has since addressed its shortcomings outlined in the VCAT decision. The deletion of a townhouse and 1 apartment dwelling from the original application has allowed for improvements to the overall built form, which include an increase in front setbacks from both Wentworth Avenue and Canterbury Road to achieve an effective transition towards the neighbourhood residential zone Schedule 3 and Wentworth Avenue streetscape. There is also an increase in side and rear setbacks on all elevations for the apartment building, a greater spacing between the proposed built form, an improved landscape outcome with increased canopy tree planting opportunities outside of the area affected by the public acquisition overlay Schedule 5. The proposal now achieves high compliance against Res Code, including all off-site amenity impact standards, subject to conditions relating to minor overlooking matters. It is therefore recommended that the Urban Planning Delegated Committee issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit.
I will now move to public submissions. We have 6 people in the audience tonight have indicated they'd like to make a presentation. Again, I'd remind you there's a strict 3-minute limit, and I would request that if you find that what you're proposing to say doubles up with what a previous presenter has made, I'd ask you to move on from that, given the hour of the night. Thank you. I call upon Betta Steinberg to join us.
Good evening, Beata Steinberg, Canterbury. I live at 4 Wentworth Avenue, directly adjacent to the north of 2 Wentworth Avenue and the proposed Townhouse 1 and Townhouse 2. My family has been living at 4 Wentworth Avenue since 1988. My major concern pertain to the health and safety of my trees and overlooking. Although several permit conditions are proposed for tree protection, it remains unclear to me how compliance with these conditions will be enforced and monitored. Photo 1, I hope that you've got it available in front of you, shows a large tree 24, which canopy extends predominantly over my property. Can you imagine what could happen if this tree were to topple down? I note that the council's arborist report states, I quote, the trees are unlikely to be significantly impacted during excavation for fencing works. But what exactly do unlikely and significantly even mean in this context? What about the underground excavations, installing deep retaining walls and altering the trees' surroundings? Photo 2 shows the current screening provided by 324 and 325. Photo 3 shows a large canopy tree 32. Photo 4, 5, and 6 show extensive, shallow spreading roots of tree 32, which are visible to the naked eye. This tree is less than a meter from my property. Photo 7 shows 20-year-old magnolias, which have not been included in the protective measures. My overlooking concerns, Photo 7A shows a drawing of the position of Townhouse 1 in relation to my property. I note the council's assessment as saying that the proposal is generally compliant with standard B22, subject to some minor conditions. However, I question whether generally compliant is truly acceptable, and furthermore, I could not locate any specific details regarding the so-called minor conditions. Photos 8, 12, 13, 14, they show a view from inside of my house to property at 2 Wentworth Avenue, through my kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom at eye level. The existing property is closer to the fence, townhouse 1, but I can still see the chimney crown and of the existing house. Moving townhouse 1 further away will open the view even further. Now, I propose the committee to look into conditions including ensuring independent and continuous oversight during excavation and construction in regard to the tree, increasing the boundary fence between our properties.
Ms. Steinberg, I'll have to ask you to start to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Councillors, do we have any questions? There don't appear to be any. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I call upon Peter Jenkins to join us at the table.
Good evening, councillors. I'm a resident of Canterbury. My name is Peter Jenkins. Look, I've just got two brief matters I'd like to raise, and hopefully these can be addressed by council officers. Firstly, an observation regarding the, response to the VCAT determination. The VCAT came up with the determination that the design of the apartment building, which is 11 apartments, does not provide an acceptable transition in terms of its siting, massing, form and appearance to the Wentworth Avenue streetscape. The officer has indicated that this matter has been effectively addressed following the deletion of one townhouse and one apartment. My observation is that, notwithstanding the reduction of one townhouse and one apartment, I would contend the amended design for the apartment complex is still very massive in scale and really does not respect the neighbourhood character of the neighbouring properties. So that's just an observation. For my benefit, and I guess my fellow residents as well, the second matter relates to permit conditions. The officer's report cites 34 conditions and a large number of sub-conditions, and I think we've heard some discussion how they're applied. But it's really not clear as to how these conditions will be monitored. It may be my ignorance, but it's not clear to me. While I note there's a time limit on the commencement of works of up to 2 years, I have a question for officers. Are there any time limits in compliance with all these conditions? And what are the ramifications if the developer fails to comply? Is the permit refused? And I guess from a transparency point of view, do residents have any rights in regarding the citing of amended plans that are lodged as part of permit conditions? And in the document, it refers to design plans, landscape plans, construction plans, and you've just heard recently about the tree management plans. So how do residents engage in this process? Are we excluded or are we included? That's really the context of my submission this evening. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We will now move to that. There do not appear to be any questions from the councillors. You may resume your place in the gallery. Thank you very much. Mr. Terry Polton, would you join us at the table? Thank you.
Good evening, Terry Polton. I live in Canterbury. Thanks for the opportunity to address you. I note, comparing this particular project with Berry Street, the one you've discussed earlier, there's been no consultation with the developer whatever. Developer hasn't spoken to anybody, and there were no renders or 3D impressions of the building until they were obtained by one of your officers last Friday. So throughout this process, we have not really got any idea what this thing looked like. Those are just comments. My concern and the concern of my fellow residents is about traffic. As many of you would know, the existing conditions are that it's at the same street as Canterbury Girls Secondary College. It's a narrow street, parking on both sides, and there's a log jam of traffic already at the corner of Wentworth Avenue and Canterbury Roads at the school drop-off times, every day, morning and night. There are some photos there that show, this is standing on the south side of Canterbury Road, looking up Wentworth Avenue. You can see that queue of cars that sometimes goes 300 metres up the street while cars are trying to get out of the street. They can't do it now. The addition of 29 extra car spaces is not going to help that matter. A vehicle trying to turn right out of Wentworth Avenue will hold up the traffic. That one you see in that picture there, it's turning left, and there's one trying to get into the street, which it can't do because there's parking on the left-hand side. So for vehicles trying to turn right out of Canterbury Road, that means endless delays for people who are already in the street trying to get out. They can't get through. The street's too narrow. The survey that was undertaken by the developer did not survey the afternoon drop-off time at school. It was taken between 5 o'clock and 6, I think it was. And that's quiet then. The school's all gone. So we would like council to revisit that issue, to have the surveys undertaken, not at traffic peak times, but at Wentworth Avenue peak times. The engineer's report advising that development will result in minor increases in queues and wait times. I think I speak on behalf of every resident in the street who find that questionable. So we'd like to suggest that the issues relating to traffic are going to land in your lap. And we understand that it's not the developer's issue, it's your issue. So we'd like to suggest that council give consideration to, at those peak times that I talked about, that vehicles only be able to turn left into Canterbury Road. That will help. And there's a whole escalation of conditions. Across right opposite the development, there are 3 parking spaces. Causes enormous congestion now. As you can see, that vehicle trying to get into Wentworth Avenue can't do it because there are cars parked there. So we'd like to suggest that council give consideration to removing those spots at those times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to just remain in your seat, Councillor Hollingsworth has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Polton, for your presentation and for the photos. When you suggest council consider left-hand turn only, are you indicating just at school pickup time?
Yes.
So, for example, from 3 till 3 or 3 to 4?
I guess the same times that, when you drive past a school, those signs say between this and this and that. That would do the trick, or that would help. I'm not a traffic engineer or a traffic expert, but there are a whole range of escalating measures you could take. For instance, I know there are 2 schools in Canterbury where you can't even enter the street in those hours. Canterbury Primary School and Strathcona both have those circumstances. So it's up to your people to decide how far you have to go to sort this out.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Poulton. That exhausts the questions. You can return to your seat. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I now call upon Julie Molheiser to join us.
Hi, good evening. My name's Julie Molhauser. I'm a resident of Canterbury. I'll be presenting an objection tonight on the fence design at the proposed development on behalf of the 25 residents that lodged an objection. We're seeking a minor change to the proposed fencing, that's the supplied render, without the landscaping, to the townhouse and apartment development. The current fencing proposal has an open metal blade fence which sits above a small retaining wall in front of the townhouse development. However, around the apartment development, it adds up to 75 metres of unrelieved metal fencing. That includes 46 metres to Wentworth Avenue and 29 metres to the Canterbury Road frontage. If I could have the next picture, thanks. That's just the elevations that just show the scale of the length of the fencing. There are gates in that fencing, but they're flush with the metal fencing, so the appearance is of a continuous metal fence. If I could have the next picture, this shows not a residential development, but obviously a commercial development, but that effect of an unrelieved metal fence. Can I have the next picture? This is a nearby development on Canterbury Road with the corner of Mangara and Avenue Athol, and it has a similar fence design. And you can see that it also has led to, apart from the aesthetic issue, that it's got a very untidy junction with the footpath, and there are maintenance issues as a result of that. If I could have the next picture, thanks. These are some nearby apartment buildings that have taken an alternate approach where there's a small planter, and this fence is also metal, but it has a hedge in front of it. The next picture, thanks. So this is another development nearby in Cotham Road Q, and you can see the mounting of the metal fencing rather at the back of the planter, and that enabling a small hedge in front. Just the next picture, thanks. This is a similar development. It also has solid fencing, which also brings me to another issue with the metal blade fencing is the acoustic control for the communal outdoor space, which currently faces Canterbury Road and would only have a open metal blade fence protecting it from the traffic noise. We believe that this minor change would improve public amenity and future resident amenity. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to councillor questions. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Dr. Mulhauser. You'd be comfortable with the fence having a bit more variety. In your view, will that reduce the opportunity for larger tree planting if it's set back a little bit?
It would need to have an opinion from the landscape design whether that would impact it. It would be to do with, like, the footings for those planters wouldn't be very deep. But I think the aesthetic advantage for the street, that possibility also for panels for privacy and acoustic control. The other thing I didn't mention is also by recessing it a small amount, it gives the pedestrian entries a greater delineation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Oh, beg your pardon, I didn't realise.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mulhauser. I now call upon Lisa Thomas to join us.
Good evening, my name is Lisa Thomas and I'm owner-occupier at 97 Canterbury Road with my husband and 3 children. I'm here tonight to request that the council impose a sub-condition on the construction management plan for our rear access laneway to not be used for parking or construction purposes, both during and after the proposed build. Is it possible, do you have the diagram that I submitted? There's one of the laneway. I think I sent it to you this afternoon.
Chair, can I request that we stop the clock while we're looking for this?
I sent it to Brian. Yeah. Sorry, it also relates to my husband's presentation next, so. there were 2 slides. No? Okay. Oh well, I'll continue.
Look, if it's important to your presentation, I'm going to adjourn the meeting in a moment anyway, because we've just about run out of time. Do you want to give us a little bit more time to see if we can find it and you can both present together later, if that's important?
I can continue,
Okay,
and then
fine.
maybe if it's shown later, and it's in the context of my husband's presentation as well, so.
Thank you.
Do it there, but, so I'll say, you will see from the diagram, that our small laneway is a single lane of 2.9 metres wide that only has a single entry and exit point via Alexandra Avenue. It is used by 5 houses, including ours, and there are 8 parking spaces. It is important to note that for most of the houses who access this laneway, it is the only point of vehicular entry into the properties. We do not have parking access into our homes from Canterbury Road, and thus it serves as a single point of entry. This is important as the laneway must be accessible 24/7 and for safety reasons cannot be compromised in any way. To reiterate this point, if any resident required urgent medical attention, the only way we could evacuate by car is through this laneway. To be clear, throughout this proposed development, it has not been the intention to use our laneway for construction access. The main construction vehicle usage, which I believe would be specified in the building permit application and or construction management plan, would be from Wentworth Avenue with no necessity to use Alexandra Avenue. My objection is therefore to tighten the language around any potential laneway usage. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee's response to my objection cited that a construction management plan will form a condition of permit to ensure that construction impacts are considered and managed appropriately. It states that this condition will further consider matters such as the appropriation of the laneway for construction purposes, which will generally not be supported given its narrow width and potential impact on residential dwellings on the laneway for sole vehicular access. I reject the ambiguity of phrases such as further consider and generally not be supported as part of this condition. I seek for this condition to state in the notice of decision as a subcondition in the construction management plan that there be no vehicular access to construction vehicles in our laneway, both during and after the construction phase. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. There doesn't appear to be any questions. You can return to the gallery. I have to apologise to our audience tonight that we're going to have to, because we've reached a time limit, adjourn this meeting. We will then commence the council meeting, then we will adjourn the council meeting and resume this meeting shortly. Our apologies for that, we need to move forward. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Councillor Stavro.
Yes, adjourn the meeting motion is provided.
Councillor Bigger, you're happy to second that?
I am.
All in favour? The meeting is adjourned.
Good evening, everyone. Before we commence the council meeting, I must advise that due to a other meeting that is still underway, the request for the meeting is to be adjourned and we will resume shortly. So the meeting this evening, 16th of December 2024, councillors, I call upon someone to move a motion to adjourn this meeting. Councillor Addis?
I'm so moved, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Bitter?
Yep, seconded.
All right. I declare, sorry, can I have a show of hands, those that support? Those for? I see no opposition. I declare that motion carried and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I'm in search of a motion to reopen the urban planning meeting. Councillor Hollingsworth.
So moved.
Councillor Gillies, you're happy to second?
Seconded, thank you.
All in favour? We shall resume the urban planning meeting. I will now move to Lee Thomas.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify if you've received again? No? Okay.
We don't seem to have anything.
I think Julie resent it. Okay.
All right. If it comes up, we'll let you know. But would you like to start with your name and suburb, even?
Absolutely. My name is Lee Thomas. I'm the owner of 97 Canterbury Road in Canterbury, where I live with my wife Lisa, that you just heard from, and our 3 teenage daughters. I'm here to address a critical part of our objection, which is the overlooking from Townhouse 2 in the proposed development. This concern was not fully detailed in the response to objections in the council report, so I appreciate the opportunity to present it now. To be specific, I'm referring to the overlooking from 3 windows on the first floor of Townhouse 2, 2 south-facing windows and 1 east-facing window, which belong to a bathroom, master bedroom and walk-in robe. These windows, which would be shown on the left-hand side of my slide, directly overlook our backyard and into our home via our north-facing living room doors. I am aware of Res Code Standard B22 that requires windows to be screened to a height of 1.7 metres from the finished floor level. While this standard might be sufficient in typical cases, I believe that it does not address our specific situation. As the front of our property is on Canterbury Road, our car must be parked to the back of our property on a concrete platform in the northwest corner. The view that you would see on the left side of the slide would show this area indicated by a blue box. This concrete platform prevents us from planting trees or installing other natural barriers to enhance our privacy. You would also be able to see on the picture on the right-hand side, I took a photograph from the approximate position of the windows in Townhouse 2 at a height of 1.7 metres above first floor, finished floor level. You would see our car on the concrete platform and also see that there is a lack of ability for us to create privacy screening on this platform, and it would provide uninterrupted views into our home. So I just want to point out that 1.7 metres is, it means that somebody taller than 182 centimetres, fantastic. Maybe it's the second slide is what I'm talking about. If we could move to the second one.
We move to a second slide.
Great. So where I was referring to the picture on the right-hand side that was taken from the approximate position of the windows on Townhouse 2 at a height of 1.7 metres. It shows our car, the white car with the black roof, and also the concrete platform that gives us a lack of ability to plant any trees and protect our privacy. Yeah. I wanted to point out that 1.7 metres means that somebody taller than 182 centimetres, which is not uncommon, could easily see over the frosted glass into our home. I'm slightly over 180 centimetres myself, not exceptionally tall, and I can confirm that I would easily be able to see over the frosting at that level from a reasonable distance from the window. So given our inability to install natural barriers or screens on our property in direct line of these windows, we are respectfully requesting that the frosting on these windows be raised to at least 1.8 metres. This modest increase would would significantly enhance our privacy without materially affecting the comfort of the occupants in Townhouse 2. So we're not asking for any major structural changes, just a small adjustment to ensure that our family's privacy is maintained in light of our unique parking and layout challenges. It's a reasonable compromise that respects the needs of all parties involved. Thank you for your time and consideration.
If you'd just like to retain your seat. Councillor Addis, you have a question.
Thanks very much. Thanks for presenting. While I'm not suggesting that it's your responsibility to solve it, have you considered trellis, and would it address the problem, or would the angle be the problem from the property rather than...
A trellis in which location?
On the fence where you can't plant trees.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what sort of barrier that would look like. The back fence is actually a retractable fence, so we could never put anything on that. So that moves back, that opens, and on the other, so it effectively wouldn't actually create. I mean, I couldn't put anything there if I tried, because I couldn't get my car in and out. On the
thank you.
On the western boundary, it wouldn't protect my privacy anyway.
Yeah, I was looking at that little gateway. So yes, sorry.
But the bulk of the view is on the left-hand side of that gate. Yeah.
Thank you. We can ask the officers to address that fully. Thank you.
Sure.
There doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Council, we have one other submitter who's put in a very late application, but it's a balancing one. It's really representing the other side. They promised to be very short and sweet with it, so I will allow it. Michael Henderson, would you join us? And Michael, if you could start with your name and suburb and very strictly remain within the 3 limits, thank you. 3 minutes limit, thank you.
Correct. My name is Michael Henderson. I'm a director at Contour Consultants who practice out of Carlton. I'm also a resident of Kew. I'd like to start this evening by thanking council laws and council officers for their recommendation before you. If I talk concisely to this matter, at a first principles basis, it's important to understand the site is within the general residential zone and the neighbourhood residential zone. It's not encumbered by any character overlays in respect to heritage, neighbourhood character, or any landscaping or environmental overlays. It's also, in terms of policy direction, within the East Camberwell Neighbourhood Activity Centre. As has been clearly put to council officers, or been put to council laws by council officers, within the officer report, this is a repeat permit application. And in many respects, we are supportive of the recommendation that is published. Importantly to understand, this is an apartment building comprising 11 dwellings of 11.5 metres in height. It's also comprising 2 townhouses, 8.6 metres in height. From a site coverage point of view, it's 51%. That's below the 60% requirement. From a permeability requirement, it's 31%. That's above the minimum 20% requirement. From a garden area requirement, it's 45%. That's above the minimum 35%. There are key elements of this application that have responded to the previous application that was before council officers and the tribunal. As I outlined before, I'm very supportive of the officer position that's been published. There are some key components of the officer report that are worth highlighting to councillors this evening. Firstly, section 8.1 of the report says the proposal is responsive. It provides for detached dwellings on land within the neighbourhood residential zone and a 3-storey apartment building within the general residential zone. Other items to highlight, key issues. The application is strategically justified. The proposed height and townhouses are appropriate having regard to the zones. The proposal achieves compliance against Res Code, including all off-site amenity impacts. The proposed design offers a well-delivered and balanced composition. Visitor and resident parking are provided in excess of the minimum requirements. Those words, council officers, are from the council officer report, council laws. Other points to highlight in respect to the comparisons and improvements. Acknowledge there's only a few moments left. In comparison to the previous application, words of council officers include the development provides for a number of improvements to its design as compared to the previous decision plans.
I won't go through them in detail, but I'll affirm our support for the officer position as printed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Addis, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr Henderson. You were here hearing what the residents' concerns were?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions in relation to that. What confidence or how will you ensure that trees on neighbouring properties won't suffer as a consequence of your building?
Yep, so one of the conditions of permits specifically, or recommended, is conditions 10 and 11 of the permit. They're in relation to the tree protection management plan, and specifically they require the project arborist to be on site during construction, and it requires those times to be declared and submitted to council before construction starts. That's a typical condition of council that enables an element of confidence and trust that trees on the site and adjoining the site will not be compromised during the build.
And you're confident you can protect the trees, both on site and adjoining?
Yeah, and it's a reasonable question to ask because this was a key discussion point in the previous application. As part of the current application, we have commissioned a new arboricultural report which included root investigation assessments. That has been provided to council officers, which has been supported by council's own project arborist.
Okay, thank you. And you've said you're generally okay with the conditions and would adhere to them because you heard residents express concern that they might not be complied with?
Yeah, we are, and should a permit issue, it's an ongoing obligation for our client to comply with that permit at any given time.
Thank you. I've just got a couple more. Sorry, Chair. The fence design, is there any opportunity to, and I'll seek guidance from the officers, but to give it some articulation, or you heard what was requested, if that were a condition, would that be something you could consider?
Yeah, it's something that can be investigated, absolutely, Councillor. What I would highlight as part of the previous application before council, that was one of the elements that was strongly supported by the tribunal, the fencing design. So there is an element of irony to it. Notwithstanding, we're happy to investigate integrated landscaping. It was a bit unclear exactly where the objector wanted to take it, but we're happy to investigate something.
Okay, thank you. And the laneway protection, you heard that neighbours cannot have it blocked.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got a plan to enable you not to do that?
So a construction management plan has not been prepared as yet. Notwithstanding to the points made by the objectors, we've actually been in dialogue with a number of other objectors regarding that same consideration about loading and unloading via the laneway, and we're supportive of not encumbering or inhibiting access in that laneway.
Which effectively means not using it at all?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And you heard concerns about overlooking. Are you confident they can be addressed?
We are. There is one council recommendation to tidy up or to provide screening to one of the townhouses, and we're supportive of that recommendation. Okay,
And there was talk about increasing the frosting slightly. Would that hinder your development I think they were only talking about a small amount.
It's not something that we would probably look to entertain, if I'm honest. The standard of 1.7 is set in place for a reason, and if you heighten the glazing or the treatment of that window, it impacts the internal amenity of the future residents.
Thank you. I'll ask the officers to address that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Just one quick question. Yes. Mr Jenkins asked if the residents would be able to access the amended site plans if this was supported, any amendments were done. Is that something that you'd entertain to meet with the residents and allow them a viewing of the plans?
We would be happy to share that material. It's also subject to how council officers would manage that as well.
Thank you very much.
Mr Henderson, that exhausts the questions. If you could just return to your seat. Thank you
Thank
very
you all.
much. I will now return to the officers for matters arising.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. To address the position on sharing of Condition 2 plans, which is the architectural endorsed plans, from an officer perspective, we are limited by privacy reasons. If the permit applicant would like to share those materials with the residents, then they are of course free to. But from our perspective, a freedom of information request would need to be made if they were to come through local government channels, at least. To jump to tree retention, so there was a question that was raised in relation to conditions that would protect trees. So I believe the submitter was not able to locate those conditions, so they're actually located in Condition 2I. So we require those works provided up front within the architectural plans as opposed to putting them within the landscaping plan or the tree management plan condition. So that clarifies that matter. There's been a couple of trees that have been identified. So firstly, tree 24. Tree 24 is a tree that's located on site within the northeastern corner of the site. And in relation to that, Council's arborist advises that there's approximately a 10% encroachment into the tree protection zone. He's also noted a number of conditions, including not excavating within the TPZ, maintaining existing grade, using non-destructive techniques and root-sensitive footings, and that's all been incorporated in Condition 2I, as I mentioned. So we are confident that that tree can be retained and protected. In relation to tree 32, so tree 32 is located along the Wentworth Avenue frontage in the northwestern corner of the site, and that is approximately a 3% encroachment into the tree protection zone. There's also significant root growth. There's an existing building footprint within the proposed encroachment area. So therefore, Council's arborist has inspected the site and he has checked those measurements himself and confirmed that so long as conditions, in the same conditions I read out earlier in relation to maintaining the existing grade within the TPZ, that would ensure that the tree will continue to be retained within that area. As for tree 25, that was the group of magnolias that the submitter noticed was not included within the architectural plans. The reason for that is because there's no works proposed within the TPZ of those trees. Nevertheless, officers have included a condition requiring that to be shown when the plans are to be endorsed. There was a question about permit expiries. So the standard 2 years to commence work has been included on the recommended list of permit conditions with 4 years for completion. If the permit applicant were to seek an extension, then that's a matter that officers would consider on a case-by-case basis. As for consultation, there was a question as to whether or not adequate consultation was done during the course of this application. This application has been advertised in accordance with Section 52 of the Planning and Environment Act. So from council officers' perspective, there's no further consultation that is required. It would be pertinent to note that since the previous application was determined by council and then determined by the tribunal, that there have been those changes introduced by Amendment C243 to the Burundara planning scheme in terms of codifying certain aspects of the standards within clause 55. So the proposal as current takes benefit from that change within the planning controls. Previously, it didn't comply with street setbacks and side and rear setbacks. It now complies with those matters. In terms of offsite amenity impacts, the only standard that isn't strictly complied with is in relation to overlooking. And as I mentioned, we will address that via conditions on permit. So briefly, those conditions, there's 2 of them. They have been made clear within the conditions that follow within the abstract. So to point it out to you, one of the submitters identified that they couldn't locate those conditions for overlooking. So one of them is condition 2B. So we just need to clear up an inconsistency on the plans in relation to whether or not the fence that is located on the north elevation is 1.95 meters or 1.9 meters. So on 2 separate plan sheets, they state different dimensions. The next matter is in relation to 2C, which is that we just need to have a dimension put down in relation to townhouse 2 and those south-facing habitable windows on the first floor to be screened to a height of 1.7 meters. So perhaps just to touch on the other matter that Councillor Addis mentioned, officers would just reiterate that standard B22 in terms of overlooking has been addressed in relation to those particular windows that was raised by Mr. Thomas, I believe. The standard requires 1.7 meters, that's been provided. So from officers' perspective, we are satisfied that the standard has been achieved and that there's no further increase of that opaque glazing is required. Very briefly, in relation to traffic, the concerns that have been raised relate to school traffic generated by Canterbury Girls College. It's not this proposal. Council strongly encourages the submitters to approach Council's Traffic and Transport Department for further consideration and investigation. While existing traffic problems are acknowledged in Wentworth Avenue, this circumstance is one that could potentially be managed by Council with due process and investigation, but it is not of this proposal's making and not a matter that warrants refusal, and that's also a matter that the tribunal has accepted in its previous decision. In relation to the fence quality, which is probably the last matter on my list, from officers' perspective, and this is also supported by Council's urban designer, is that the metal blade finish, the metal blade fence in bronze finish is a high quality material. It provides for permeable gaps that allows for views into the landscaped front gardens. It's also pertinent to note that this is a material that's integrated throughout the design. It is used on the top floor of the apartment building in terms of a metallic bronze finish. It's also used in the perforated metal screening on the eastern elevation of the apartment building. And it's further applied to balcony balustrades as well within the development. So therefore it's integrated an acceptable part of the design response proposal. Officers wouldn't be recommending any changes in terms of the fencing material as we consider it appropriate. Thank you.
We'll now move to councillor questions. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. If we can, yes, you're at the top of the screen. Could I just check? I think it's meant to say in 2 Wentworth Avenue, Canterbury. We can fix that, can't we?
2.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Addis. That is correct.
Noticed.
It is meant to be 2 Wentworth. Thank you.
Thank you. And a couple of queries. Mrs. Steinberg was concerned that the comment was made that it was generally compliant. And I guess the question is, with the conditions, is the overlooking fully compliant? Because she was a bit, I think she was a bit concerned that it felt a bit vague.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. The proposal complies with B22. The only matters that have been addressed by condition are just minor plan details to ensure that the correct dimensions are shown, etc.
And overlooking,
that has been addressed.
That is definitely compliant, not generally compliant with the conditions?
Yes.
Yep, thank you. Can you clarify how conditions will be monitored? That will be a role council will ensure that occurs?
Through yourself, Chair, maybe I'll touch on that. And I think there was some discussion earlier about the timing of compliance with conditions, and certainly meeting all of the condition expectations and expectations is a requirement to complete the development. Now, that is a matter that Council's enforcement team can and will follow up on if there is any identified non-compliances.
And residents could, of course, contact you if they had concerns, because
absolutely,
the planning side is council responsibility.
Absolutely, and residents regularly do, and I would encourage them, if they identify any areas of non-compliance, to raise them with council, and we will follow those up.
Thank you. And I know you're not traffic engineers, but the turning right into Canterbury Road, would that be in the hands of Vic Roads, or do we have some say in that, given that the side street is a council road, I'm assuming?
Through you, Chair. Any kind of traffic islands or major improvement works would need to be run past the Department of Transport, being the responsible authority for Canterbury Road. It is their decision, not council's decision, as to whether or not there's any entry restrictions, for example, into Wentworth Avenue.
But we could lobby them.
Chair, absolutely. Given the side road is a council road, any option or potential to control turns in and out of that road would be something that we would play a key role in and would work with Vic Roads on.
Okay, thank you. I believe that there's a permit that has to be applied for. I can't remember what it's called if you want to occupy a laneway. And I guess my question is, we would refuse that on the basis of the need for residents to be able at all times to access their properties?
Again, through yourself, Chair, absolutely. There's an occupation of land permit that would be required to occupy any council land. So occupation of that laneway would require that type of permit. There are situations where council can and will support part or temporary occupation of land if it is absolutely required for the development on a site. However, consideration will certainly be given to the laneway access, the need for that access, and the impact on surrounding properties. And we've heard from the applicant here that they are of the view that they will not need to access or utilise or occupy that laneway as part of the construction on this site.
And potentially that could be part of the construction management plan, or you're saying we can't say that under no circumstances, because there might be
Again, through yourself, Chair, I'm always hesitant to put restrictions on how a site will be developed. So all of the needs associated with that site through a construction management plan, without that being a considered and thought through process with the developer in considering what they need for that site, because there will be some situations that can't be predicted or anticipated in terms of need to undertake a development that can't be fully anticipated at this point in the planning process. There certainly is an understanding and awareness of the impact of blocking a laneway in terms of the surrounding residents that use that laneway.
Okay, so I guess that's the best I can ask for. And just a question in relation to Mr. Thomas and his concerns about the overlooking, and it does seem to be quite a unique situation. I understand that we don't have anywhere exactly to go above the 1.7. Are there any suggestions about how that might be handled, or are you confident that that will stop the overlooking, I suppose, is a better question.
Yeah, through yourself, Chair, and perhaps it's worth going back and having a discussion briefly around the principles of overlooking in the planning system and also those that are included or guided by Res Code. Res Code sets a screening measure at 1.7 metres in height, but what Res Code does is sets that height to generally prevent overlooking for the general use of a site and development. It's not there to prevent any possible overlooking. So if someone that was tall went right up to the window and wanted to look out above the 1.7, then that will be possible. They will be able to look into the adjoining property. The measure of the 9 metre distance to protecting overlooking on an adjoining property is there to give a level of protection, but someone of course can see past 10 metres, but it's to give a reasonable level of protection of overlooking, just like the 1.7 metres is for general use of dwellings and the general use of the dwelling that's being protected from that overlooking as well. It's not to prevent any possible overlooking, it's to set a general benchmark that's for general use.
Okay, thank you. That's exhausted my questions, and I will have a motion when the time's right.
Thank you.
I'll get in first.
Got it. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. A very quick question, just following on with the traffic turning left onto Canterbury Road situation. Is that something we would need to raise in general business, seeking a request for the traffic management team to investigate, or can that be recorded now?
Through yourself, Chair, it's quite often where these sorts of general traffic issues are raised through a planning permit application process and consideration of objections. We will raise those issues with our traffic team. I think this is one that's where there's a clear demonstration from the community that there is already a traffic issue in regard to that street. So I'm comfortable to give an indication to Council that we will take that matter up with the traffic team and raise that with them for consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you. I just have a quick question that is probably, well, it is for future thinking, I suppose, but it goes to the point which we haven't discussed tonight about number of bicycle spaces provided. There are 14, well, there are 24 car spaces. Now, I guess my question is, I mean, this proposal sits almost right on top of the anniversary trail. And I realize that in looking at it, clause 52 only requires 4 spaces, so it's well and truly within met the standard. But this is not a standard that we set, correct? Set by the state government. Is there any, is that something that, in order to influence a change of that, because that might just be an outdated approach to how we think about these things, particularly as we're thinking about greater densification, is there a way that in future that you'd begin to address that or advocate for changes?
Again, through yourself, Chair, absolutely. That, in fact, the introduction of bicycle parking into the planning scheme for residential developments was only included in a change to the car parking provisions probably 8 or 10 years ago now. So it is something that has been introduced. It is an evolving area and an area where there may well be future changes that are included, because the car parking provisions of the planning scheme, including including bicycle parking provisions, are being reviewed, and we have advocated a position in regard to those car parking changes, and bike parking will be part of that consideration. So absolutely there's an opportunity to continue to advocate for additional bike parking.
Thank you. It's particularly important to hear in light of densification. Thank you.
We've now exhausted the questions. We'll return to you, Councillor Addis, for a motion.
I did ask officers to prepare an alternative motion that seeks some minor changes. So I think there was that and a traffic request. Yep, that's the other one. So
do you want to start
essentially,
then?
I'm asking for some articulation with the fence, and that the traffic team undertake a review.
So do you want to start there, Councillor Addis, and then we'll move back to see if everyone's had a chance to read it?
Waiting? Somebody had... Sorry, I didn't quite. I'm just waiting for a seconder, I suppose.
Oh,
if people have had a chance to...
I'd like you to say that this is the motion as
yes.
amended before we seek a seconder.
Do we have recommendation B? It's, yeah. That's the way we word it, is it?
Seems a bit bizarre, but could I ask a question of officers just in respect of the appropriateness of that in being included from this meeting in the context of this decision?
Through yourself, Chair, it's probably a type of matter that would generally be brought up in general business for officers then to follow up with the transport team. So it's not a review of the parking and traffic conditions, as I indicated in perhaps my answer to the previous question. It's not a matter that is unusual to be brought up with our traffic and transport team. However, it is not a direct planning permit application decision matter. So probably it is better to be a general business matter, and that certainly isn't something that can be taken up with the traffic and transport team.
So, Councillor, you're happy we remove that recommendation B?
Yeah, look, I think I'm confident we can achieve the same thing by general business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we scroll up through the other alterations to the motion?
I think it was up a bit further. There, yeah.
We passed one. Were you happy to pass on that?
That's
Go to this first, okay.
Main bit.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, that's what I was seeking.
Do you want to stick to that? Because the officers responded to that before, I guess, about the indentations of the fence, etc.
I do want to stick to that. I acknowledge that the officers have said that the fence itself is of high quality and that it matches, but I don't think that putting indentations will affect that.
So do we need to go back to the other piece, a few clauses down that had a modification in it as well? Can we go back down to that?
I think it was just to create consistency. Can I just confirm with officers that that makes it work correctly?
Through you, Chair. Those conditions, as worded, if we scroll up, can be achieved from officers' perspective in terms of providing for 3 indentations within the general fence line. It will allow for a minimum of half a metre width of soft landscaping and planting to be provided at edges at regular intervals of the fence line on Wentworth Avenue, and then the same along Canterbury Road. So it would just mean that the soft landscaping, instead of being behind the metal blade fence in some areas, would be brought in front of it so that it can be seen and appreciated from the public realm. Having a look at the deep soil planting zones, that wouldn't impact on the planting of any canopy trees as well. So from officers' perspective, it's feasible.
Okay, and the I that I think Councillor Gold was, and that makes sense within what we're suggesting?
Yes, so we are looking at, I believe, condition 4I, which requires any changes required by condition 2 to be implemented in the landscape plan. So if we perhaps scroll to the start of the, so it should be, so just there. So condition 2T and condition 2U speak to the indentations.
Yeah, so it's just to make sure that the trees continue to be protected given the indentations. Is that
correct? And the fence is also shown in the landscape plan along with soft landscaping.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy with that.
Happy with that as your motion?
Yep.
I'm therefore in search of a seconder for that motion. Councillor Thompson, are you happy to second that?
I am, thank you.
Is there anyone opposed to the motion as it now stands? We have opposition. Councillor Addis, would you like to speak to your motion? Thanks.
Look, I will try and be quick because I realise it's been a very long meeting. I'd like to start by acknowledging the amount of work that both officers and the residents have put into this over quite a protracted period of time to get to this point. You know, there's been a visit to VCAT and many modifications to plans, and while people might not be totally happy with what's here, I think we can acknowledge that it is a huge improvement from where we started, and that is thanks to the diligence of residents and officers. Look, it will have an impact on the neighbourhood. I don't think anyone can deny that, but when we have a building before us that is compliant and in many respects conforms to the concerns or addresses the concerns that VCAT expressed, I feel that we are almost obliged to recommend approval, despite perhaps not liking aspects of it and in many ways agreeing with what the residents have said. But these are the rules that we act within, sometimes reluctantly. I think all of us who know the area do understand that there are traffic issues, and it is particularly perilous trying to turn out of Wentworth into Canterbury Road, given the conditions that apply with the bend in the road, and this is a bit of an incline. It is quite difficult. So I've heard, I must remember, in general business to seek what we've taken out, but I think it is quite important that we achieve what we can, although I do acknowledge that it isn't formally part of this process. Maybe officers, and I know again it isn't part of this permit condition, but maybe officers could work with the residents, or maybe they could talk with officers about some ways to try and help their concerns about overlooking. I acknowledge that that isn't something we can do here, but there might be some suggestions that could be made. And I am concerned about the laneway and the fact that really it can't be occupied, but I accept that officers will do their very best to make sure that residents aren't inconvenienced and in general will not allow occupation of the laneway. So we don't always like totally what we seek to approve, but this probably is as good as we're going to get, and delaying it could actually make it a great deal worse, is what I'm understanding. So thank you, everyone, for coming in and talking to us and giving us your wisdom, and thanks to my colleagues.
Councillor Thompson, would you like to speak now or reserve your right?
Happy to reserve my right.
Okay. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I support the officer's recommendation. I don't see the need to tinker with the fencing. As they say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Just because one submitter doesn't happen to feel enamoured of the design isn't sufficient reason to change it and impose the additional expense upon the developer for no good reason. The officers have told us that VCAT was indeed quite supportive of that approach with the fencing, so for the life of me I don't understand why we'd feel the need to change it.
No further comments. Councillor Thompson? No? Councillor Addis, I return to you to close out debate.
Very brief. Having been to a couple of meetings with officers, well, one with officers and residents and one with just residents, I do want to assure everyone that it was more than one submitter who had concerns about the fence. In fact, they were a group that were fairly united in their shared concerns and have had the courtesy to us to divide up their talk in a way that doesn't mean they repeat the same concerns. And I think it's also worth noting that I think I heard the developer say that they potentially didn't have problems with this slight modification. So it seems like a small thing to ask to help residents feel a little more satisfied. So again, thank you to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. I'm going to move now to put the motion. All of those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Well, we're whizzing through to general business fairly quickly, so you hope you remembered what you were going to say. General business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? Councillor Addis.
A traffic assessment, please, as perhaps we can take it out and put it somewhere else, but an assessment as we had initially mentioned. I think we all know where we're heading with this.
Sorry, can I just ask clarification? That is the condition that was in
About
inappropriate.
traffic, yes.
Can I ask a question before we move further? Can a traffic report be asked at any time? And if so, I'm just sort of asking whether that's a needed, whether we need the actual motion. That's all.
Look, I think it might give the residents some security. That I acknowledge what you're saying. Yep.
Okay.
And can I just have one other quick comment? Really, as a general business, to thank the officers for the enormous effort they put into the Sunday afternoon meeting we had that was very short notice and did actually, I know there was some difficulties, but given the constraints and the generosity of officers to give up their time to make the meeting possible in such short time constraints, and also to acknowledge the absolutely wonderful job officers did in their presentations. So just a thank you.
Thank you. Urgent business? No items of urgent business. Confidential business? I will now move. Sorry.
Have we?
I thought we were accepting that we'd read it before, but I'm happy to come back to that.
Are you looking for a seconder? That's where I thought we were, still for a seconder on the, we haven't,
General
we
business.
haven't
Are we
moved.
moving it as a motion? Okay. Right, okay. I thought we were simply noting it because we were told before if we noted now it would be done. So we want to run that as a formal motion. Thank you. Okay, here's the motion. Do we have a... Councillor Adders, are you happy with this as a motion?
Sorry, Chair, what part of the agenda are we now on?
General
I
business.
heard you call urgent business.
No, general business. So I've been accused of missing out the motion, and there's a motion, so I'm happy to go back to it. Councillor Adders, are you happy with that as a motion?
If that complies with governance.
Does that comply with governance?
If it's not required, then let's just leave it. That's fine. I just was trying to clarify where we were in the meeting.
I trust the officers. I don't require it to be a formal motion.
Okay, so we don't need a seconder in our... Are we happy if we move forward with that?
She's not moving as a motion.
That's what I thought. Okay. Resuming where we were before, urgent business, none. Confidential business. Can I now move to close the meeting, everyone? Thank you. Before I close this meeting, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed, and good night.